Hello, hello, hello. I'm just sharing out the live as we talk or as I get started. Going to be doing a few things today while we do this just so that my brain works better. Hello, hello, everybody. Yay, you guys found it even before I shared it out to you, which means that it's actually popping up on the feed again. So fucking awesome. Trying to make sure that I get it shared out to everybody so that everybody has access. If you know people that might normally be here and you have them, please go ahead and share them. Awesome. Oh, okay. That's cool. Cool. Thank you. That helps actually a lot. It tells me that people are getting it and getting it quickly. I'm going to talk a little bit about European ancestry today, ancient European ancestry, as I do my nails because I need to get my nails done. I've made sure that I've done the grinding already so that you don't have to deal with listening to me grind away at my fucking nails as I try and get rid of them. Oh, I needed to change. I knew I needed to change something. Let me no, I'm just leaving that. Okay, let's see if that works. Okay. Sorry, I have to get everything set up and put together so that it works the way it needs to work so that I can do the function. I'm not the most functional person, so I have to do all this shit to do the function to get to the point that I can do the function because the function is not my fun. And I know that I was planning on being on, and then I didn't. And I apologize for disappointing. The end of my last live was a little bit hard for me, and I get to a point where I question whether or not I want to do TikTok. I'm not a social media person. I'm not a person who is really good at this kind of stuff, mainly because to me it's all very it just doesn't function as well for my brain most of the time, and so for me it becomes a little bit hard. And so I have to leave sometimes, especially like it's not a safe zone. TikTok's not a safe zone, and I have a hard time with humans as it is right now. I'm very agoraphobic right now. I've been through a lot of fucking trauma, and because of a lot of fucking trauma, is it skipping? Okay. It might have just been me kind of doing a couple things really quick in it, and I had to like make sure it's brighter so I could see shit and things like that. It might have been that made it look like it was skipping. If it is still skipping, it might be a pop out and come back in moment. I don't know if it's not skipping for everybody. I never know because my shit is my internet is weird, and so it can absolutely be skipping. So I get. I have mental health issues, and I think anybody who's been here for a hot moment knows that because I've discussed them. And so my mental health issues make it very hard for me, especially TikTok becomes a place of attack, right? TikTok becomes a place of lateral violence. TikTok becomes a place of I've judged who you are just by 2 seconds of watching you and maybe a sentence you said. And because of that, I think that I can talk shit to you or I can delegitimize you to yourself, right? Like I can make you something wrong with yourself. And so for me, it gets hard. And especially with what I do on TikTok, I literally tend to experience a lot of the trauma that I have been experiencing since I was like 12. That was not eating. I'm not taking my meds anymore, daughter of mine, because they were making me sick. And so I'm taking a couple of different supplements to try and combat the lack of meds. I am drinking a Shark Attack Rebel, but I'm trying to, that was kratom because I'm trying to keep myself up a bit
with not taking my meds. My meds, it made it to where I like literally had like 3 nights where I like my body was too stimulated, my stomach was too stimulated. I was up all night because I was feeling sick, and so I had to stop taking my medications for my neurodivergence and for my depression. And so I'm trying to make sure that I'm still functioning and doing the things it's supposed to do and being good human and taking care of family and taking care of everything, which is not always easy for the me. Good morning, Doomberry. Doom Bunny. I don't know why it went Doomberry. I think Bomberry and Bunny kind of mixed in my head. So it wasn't like when my meds, so what it was, I would take them and then like I take them in the morning and I was on a lot of Adderall. I even had to cut back my Adderall. And then they put me on Prozac, and Prozac is a stimulant too. And so basically what it was doing was I was taking too many stimulants, and the apple cider vinegar probably would have helped like process them, but that would have probably actually made it worse because it was just too many stimulants in my body. And so I tried to cut back on some of them and it just wasn't working fully. Yeah, it was. It is a tough combo. They tried to put me when they originally diagnosed me because I am an adult diagnosis, a late adult diagnosis of ADHD. Um, and when they originally diagnosed me, they tried to put me on a medicine that literally made me nope out for a week and a half. Like I just literally like I plan to go to the bar for karaoke. I love karaoke. Everybody's going out for karaoke. My partner is standing over me in my lounge chair as I am playing games. And he's like, want to come to the bar? You wanted to come to the bar. And I haven't gotten out of my house coat for 4 days. He's like, you want to come to the bar? You want to come to the bar? And I'm like, nope, 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 nope. If it involves getting out of this chair, nope. And I did that for like a week and a half. And I called my doctor. I said, can't take these. They made me nope out of life. Like I was just literally noping out of life. And so that's why it's been a hard journey. So I have no clue what just happened. I have no clue what just happened. Are people here? It said it paused my live, and I don't know what it did. It just said it paused my live. I thought I got banned. I thought it was a live ban. I thought it went, what the fuck are you talking about? We're banning you again. Okay, so I'm here. I don't know what the fuck happened. It literally just blipped me out for a second. It paused me and I have no clue why. Um, so I did like it went away. Like it was weird. And you know me, I'm automatically, oh fuck, I got banned for talking about my medication. So I was like, fuck, they banned me for talking about meds. But yeah, I'm just playing with my meds and not playing with my meds. I'm definitely talking to my doctor. I'm not self-medicating. But because I'm ingesting, I'm taking some supplements to try and make sure that I can stay positive, and that my mental health is staying positive. That's what I was taking. Um, that makes sense. And I don't know what's going on. TikTok is weird to me on a normal basis, let alone on a basis when TikTok is having its own issues. Um, I did want to talk today a little bit about European ancestry. I'm kind of trying to put up some of the things that get people to be like, what the fuck? And so I'm kind of like trying to do some of the what the fuck shit. This is not necessarily what the fuck, but it is one of those things that tends to have a lot of interest. And so I do want to go ahead and talk about it. And I also want to state, I'm not here to teach Indigenous things. I'm not here to teach Indigenous issues. I'm not here to, I'm not here to be an educator about Indigenous life, especially not Turtle Island Indigenous life. I can teach you how to connect to your Indigenous ancestry. I can teach you how to connect in different spaces. I can teach you how to see how Europeans lived prior to I can teach you to find information. I can teach you that there are more indigenous nations out there that you know that you don't know of. I can teach you how to. I kind of look at it as trying to teach white people how to white people better, right? But I am not here to teach indigenous things. Period. Um, I'm not here to teach indigenous lifestyles. I'm not here to teach ceremony. I'm not here to connect you to nations. I'm here to give you information, right? I'm here to give you information. And I'm stating these things because of what made me end the last live and where my brain disconnected and I had to leave for a week. Um, I am not here to teach you those things. You can think that I'm not indigenous enough for you. That's okay. You can think in your heart of hearts that I'm a pretendian. I'm not claiming to be a member of any nation. I'm not claiming to, I'm not using my indigeneity to forward myself, to uplift myself, or as a brand name so that people will fucking pay me money. And I am certainly never going to any of the nations that my grandparents belong to or my great grandparents belong to and asking for anything, right? Um, So you can think that I'm not indigenous enough for you, and you can think that I'm whatever you think I am. But understand that I am not here to teach indigenous people how to be indigenous. I'm not here to teach white people how to be indigenous. I am here to teach white people how to white people better. I am here to give information to indigenous people that is confirmation that we're finally seeing within white academia, right? I'm definitely always going to be here handing out information so that indigenous people can uplift themselves. Not, I don't know, that sounds a little weird, but so that indigenous people have facts so that they can take those facts places, right? So, because we know that white academia, especially unless you have stuff that they will listen to, they won't fucking listen, right? So I'm here to give stuff to listen to so that you have the ability to be listened to better by white people sometimes, right? Not like I'm trying to save, not like I'm trying to give, not like I'm trying to teach, but white people are finally seeing this so that you know that white people are finally seeing this so that you can go, yo, white people, you already know this shit, right? Um, but I am not here to teach ceremony. I'm not here to teach people how to. I did. And I honestly, afterwards, I went, a tear would have smacked me for what I did because I was asked protocol and I gave protocol. And the person was like, oh, hell no. And fucking noped out. And I was like, oh, and it froze me for a minute. Then it froze my brain. And so I need to make it clear from the forefront, especially as a new thing, especially as a new account, especially as new stuff coming along. I am not here to teach indigenous people how to indigenous, and I'm not here to teach white people how to indigenous. I'm here to teach white people how to white people better. Right. And that is something that I'm here because I was requested to do this by many indigenous people, right? By many people who are members of nations, because of the fact that if because there are many allies out there that want to white people better, right? There are many people out there that want to white people better. And so I'm trying to teach people how to white people better. If you're coming in here and you think that I'm trying to use my indigeneity to uplift those things, please let me know. But do understand that you have to have an actual conversation with me and you actually have to fucking know who the fuck I am before you can tell me. Even then, you shouldn't be telling anybody else who the fuck they are. Unless I'm trying to be a part of your nation or trying to be a part of your community, you don't get to tell me whether or not I belong. Right? It just doesn't work like that. I can't hear you. Like, hold on one second. I think my volume is down. There it is. Go ahead.
I want to quote a really smart lady, one who I quote in my lives a lot because I promote her quite a bit when she ain't looking. She's a paleoanthropologist / archaeologist here on TikTok, and she gives these lives that are really educating and help a lot of people. And so she's the expert, right, on science. She teaches people how to do proper research. She debunks a lot of baloney. She's real supportive of my community. And one day everybody said, so So if you're the expert, whose creation story? Because we all got these different creation stories. Who's right? And she said something really, really smart. She said, believe them all. Because she stays out of people's business, right? You're just here to educate. Of course, folks, if y'all haven't caught on, that's her. I'm quoting her. She's never tried to insert herself into communities that she doesn't belong. She is here by Indigenous request from multiple members of the community from many different tribes. She minds her lane, and she's really good at science. We appreciate you. We respect you. If we can carry on with class, that'd be great. There's a lot of stress. There's been a lot of fighting. We're trying to deal with it. I would just push past all the negativity today. Those of us who are mods, let's just block negativity or mute them.
And the mods were on top of it. That's what happened. Like the person immediately got blocked the minute that they started. And I probably went to block them myself because I probably would have had a conversation with them so that they could understand. But that's my fucking head too. And I understand, you know, I realize that sometimes I probably try and make people understand more than I should. But thank you. And I want you to know, especially and specifically, that it is you and a couple of other people who actually are the reason that I was like, okay, I can't just walk the fuck away. Right. And I literally like right after it happened, still in the live, part of my brain checking out was I was like, Atira would smack me upside the head for giving that person protocol in the middle of my fucking live. I'm not supposed to do that. I'm supposed to just sit, you know, fucking, hey, if you want to talk about this in another space, we can talk about this in another space, but this isn't the space. Like Atira would have smacked me upside the head. I know better. She taught me better.
Well, I think everybody can agree that there's no arbiter of indigeneity on TikTok. There is no end all be all indigenous way. That like we all have different protocols for our tribes and our communities at large, and it's important. If you respect tribal sovereignty, you'll respect the individual communities and their say over their own communities, and you always have. So it's kind of impossible to say, well, what would an indigenous person do? Well, there's not really an exact answer because there are so many communities.
Yeah. I think that's real. Like, I think that, you know, and I was talking to somebody yesterday or the day before who was asking questions about what's going on, you know, with communities. And actually, it started out about whitewashing and stuff. And, you know, I think like I grew up in the Pacific Northwest and I grew up on or near reservations in the Pacific Northwest. Like I was always a member of community. Like I was always around a lot of, you know, indigenous people, and I was always on the res. And the reservations here are completely different than the reservations, like the Badlands reservations. Like people sometimes don't understand. And I remember being in Standing Rock, and there was a boy from here, and we were in a group of people. It was me and him, and I think another two people that were from the coast. We were in a group of people who were all Lakota. And in this group of people, the boy asked for one of us to braid his hair. Now, in certain nations, braiding somebody's hair is a signifier of a relationship, right? We don't do, and he was answered with, we don't do that unless we're dating, you know, like, yet this was somebody who was connected. This is somebody who's enrolled. His nation doesn't look at it like that, whereas the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota nation does. Like, we have to remember that there is no pan-indigenous culture in the United States and Canada. It's not a pan-indigeneity. So I never grew up. Nobody ever asked for protocol where I grew up. I've been through so many fucking, you know, I've been going to powwow since I could remember. And I've never had anybody go, what's your nations? Who's your parents? You know, I mean, other than as a child being a total fucktard, being told, who the fuck's your mom so I can deal with the shit, you know, like, but I've never had anybody do that. I never even experienced that until I started moving into different spaces, right? I think that a lot of people don't understand that we're not pan. It's not everywhere. Not one person's idea of what, not one nation's idea of what makes indigeneity applies to all nations, you know. I think that's an important thought process.
I had, because my live tries to encourage people to reintegrate with their people, to reconnect, as it were.
Yeah.
on occasion, I get somebody who's fresh to TikTok who actually is connected. And there have been some people who are in tribal leadership or in the enrollment office who do come on TikTok eventually.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get tested, and they come in and they'll, how do you do it? What are you doing? What's your protocol? And last night I had a wonderful woman in my live. Last night I want to try to get her some more people to follow her, because she actually does assist with her tribe and people in the enrollment office. Well, she doesn't work for the enrollment office, but she assists people in reconnecting to their tribe. And it was a wonderful conversation about everything that was going on TikTok, and us applying, not me per se, but some folks applying the standard from one tribe to all tribes and whatnot. And she and I both agreed very strongly that it is not okay to do that, and the best thing to do is to send them directly to their people. If you can get them hooked up with a professional genealogist, that's good. The best anybody should have to offer on TikTok is hugs.
That's real.
Right. Just be supportive of each other. Everything else, just, if someone says they're hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them a drink. If someone needs help with their genealogy, there's resources. Maybe they just don't know. Hook them up with that. Send them to their people. Just don't judge. Don't pick on people. Just generally be nice. I mean, we learned this in kindergarten and pre-K.
Some people seem to have forgotten it, but yes.
But yeah, speaking for whole nations is not okay for any individual person. Nobody can do that. I can't do that. I don't have the indigenous stick. Nobody does. Send them to their people and be kind.
Yeah.
But no, you've never spoken for entire communities.
Well, and what was weird for me and what made it kind of disconnect even a little bit more in my brain was I was literally, I had up the flag background that talks about, how to, it talks about decolonization, it talks about de-indoctrination, and it's like eat the rich and toxic gender roles, right? None of these things were indigenous. Like none of it had anything to do. I mean, like, of course, decolonization, is a lot of indigenous communities are within that, right? And a part of that, right? But it was not about, indigenous stuff. And I wasn't even talking about indigenous subjects. And it was like, sometimes I feel like people use it, and it's not just that. It's there's a couple other things I feel like people use to try and silence. And I'm like, okay, I just and for me, because of because the first time I got told I was a pretendian, I was 12 years old, like, and I was in a community that was not my original community, but nobody in my original community would have ever said that to me, because they knew me. And so it for me it tends to I've spent a long time trying to overcome many levels of trauma, and not like that's like a huge level of the trauma that I've overcome, but it tends to speak to that part of my mind that goes, you're a faker, there's something wrong with you, you're the problem, you're the issue, right? And so it has a tendency, unfortunately, sometimes to affect me in greater levels than it probably should. And yet sometimes I just check out. It was the only thing. And I feel like TikTok.
You're human?
Yeah, right. I feel like TikTok has been, and I'm sure it always was because I've only been here for a couple years. And I feel like many of the social media platforms do this as well. It's like, I think I can judge you based on no knowing. And because of my judgment based on no knowing, I'm going to be very aggressive and laterally violent. Right. Like there's so much degradation of community as a whole, right? And I don't mean like people are out there, bad mouthing community. I mean like degrading communal tie, right? Like there is this thought process that, it's okay to be here and like totally disregard, entire communities or entire groups, right? And that for me can be really hard. I think that's one of the reasons that social media is so hard for me is because there's this just total disregard sometimes.
Well, I had a discussion with her about that. We talked for like a couple hours. She stayed, and she's been sitting, just FYI, people. People are are getting wind of how those who are trying to come home are getting treated on TikTok. It's jarring for those of us with missing family members. It's very irritating, to say the least. Get ready. This person's been sitting here watching, she said, for about a week. She's not happy. She will be getting enough followers to go live.
Tag me on one of her videos so I can follow her, please.
I will. As soon as she starts making some, I will.
Okay, perfect.
She's not happy. She's a very, very nice person. And just FYI, she at one point assisted in the editing of ICWA. So I really wouldn't continue to be mean. We discussed the descendant status versus the new term descendian that people are trying to push. She was not happy with the term descendian, and the term descendant, or classification of descendant from different tribes. Y'all are showing that you really don't know the difference between being able to qualify for things from the government versus we still accept this person as the part of our family. So descendant does not equate to a descendian. Okay? That was a sick twist that happened. And that's not okay either. Generally speaking, we'll be all right if we treat each other right.
Yeah.
But we're gonna some folks are probably gonna get real embarrassed. They run around being mean to people who are trying to reconnect.
Well, I've never known an elder or an auntie, an
I don't know if
uncle
she's an
even, who
elder.
thinks
I
that's
don't-
okay.
I don't know if she's an elder or not, but she definitely she said that she assisted in the editing of ICWA. So
Well, and I think that, I mean, like, I still have many elders in my life. Like, I mean, I have elders of my own. Like, I've never known an elder to remove people from space. Like, not like that. Like, if somebody's being shitty and disrespectful, I've known elders to go, hey, we need to, you can't do that here, kind of stuff. But I've never known an elder to be like, you don't belong because you're not enough blood quantum. I've never known an elder to act like that. Every single time I've ever been in the presence of anybody who is an elder, their thought processes have been about community building and about, teaching, educating. Here's the reality. This is what happened, right?
and I think that it's important that we learn what you have to teach. You have so much knowledge. It helps us protect ourselves. Last night, one of our brothers accidentally wandered into one of those lives where they were claiming that indigenous people weren't the original people, blah, 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 one of those. And he's just trying to answer questions and be nice, and I got up there and I was like, no, you don't know where you're at. Let's go in, trying to pull him out, grabbing him by the arm, like, hey, and what's funny is just so y'all know, now they're saying that the different tribes have different names for these people, but they were saying that they were little people. They said that they were the Moonite people, and yeah, so I'm gonna stay out of that one. The ancestors are watching. Funny things will happen, but you got to keep a positive attitude. I have no idea what's gonna go on there, but yeah, that's gonna be.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
They fix themselves sometimes.
Yeah, because that really fixes yourself. Like if you're claiming to be yeah, that just fixes itself. Okay, so now you're saying that you're gone because, or you're saying that, you're not human, that you're inhuman, right? There's something not, yeah, that fixes itself. That fixes itself. People can be really, really like,
I want to be a fairy.
I am a fairy. Fuck that shit. Fuck wannabe. I am. I've always wanted to be part of the Fae. I'm totally down. Let's be Fae. I asked Jay like earlier last year. I said, Jay, can I just be a fairy for a year? And he's like, yes, I'll buy you the shit to do it. I went and got ears. Listen, I want to be Fae. Selkies are Fae.
I have no idea what happens in an instance like that, but I'm not touching it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. People be wild, right? And TikTok, and I think it's because of the fact that it's such a video content. People are more capable of being wild, right? TikTok is such a fucking wild. No, the ethnocentrics are stating that they're the Fae now. From
The little people, the Moonite people.
from legends of indigenous nations, like they should try and claim that they're the first.
I think they think it's a lost tribe.
Yeah. That sounds probably it. And probably and don't get me wrong, like I totally think that the Fae and I think that the ogre and all of those things, I think that all of those things are actually real humans, right? But
just fucking throw glitter at them every time you see them.
That's it right there. That's what we need to do. Because that's absolutely silly. But and I think it's really part of that disconnect.
It's like a bad game of D&D.
Well, I feel that's really it. And one that has no fucking thought processes, right? Like one that doesn't have any like guidelines, like one that doesn't have any, education behind it, right? Like, yeah, that's real. The Fae, so the Fae is one word that is used for people who are like the elves are the Fae, the pixies are the Fae. I use the word Fae for anything that is considered to be any of the mythologies that we have that any of the mythologies that we have that include other peoples that are not considered to be human peoples, right? Like the Selkies or stuff like that. Just because for me, I use Fae, but that's because for me, I have a lot of Irish history and a lot of Celtic history in me. And so with that Celtic history in me, I learned of the Fae as the Fae. And so that's why I use the terminology Fae.
I mean, it's really technically not our business at that point. That's between them
and the Fae, because let's be real.
I ain't in it. So, like, I'll just throw glitter and look the other way because I don't like horror.
Oh, when you don't know what you're fucking with. That's what that is. That's all that runs through my head.
Look the other way. I don't watch horror.
Yeah, when you don't know what you're fucking with.
Like, I'm out of it now. Literally out of our hands. Anyway, I think they think it's a lost tribe. I don't know. But that was interesting. But at the end of the day, there is a lot of tension. We needed that laugh.
Yeah.
Yes, what I said was true. They are saying that. They've been saying it off and on here and there for a while now. I told folks, and there we go. I had a witness last night. My buddy wandered in there by accident. But yeah.
Welcome back. Yeah. And when I just want you to know.
They were doing it? Didn't I say a while back they were doing it?
Yeah.
Doing what? Like changing up their whole stories again?
Claiming that they were the little people.
So like there's different kinds of little people because there's like this, and those are like house spirit kind of like little people that people like from Mexico believe in. Like that's what I know in particular because my mom taught me about it because she's Mexican, right? And like there's other different kinds of like forest spirits and like magical things and stuff like that. And a lot of times it's very much don't talk about it because it's believed that if you mention it, you will summon it or it'll come looking for you. And it's not always going to be helpful when it comes to find you because when they hear themselves get called by someone, it's more like a who's talking shit about me kind of thing. So when they they show up, they're mad at you for mentioning them because they're like, "Who told you to put my name in your mouth?" And so, like, that's why we don't mention them specifically. Yep. We don't try to learn about them a whole lot and everything like that, because while we mind our own business, they leave us alone. But there's little signs that they can see you, that they are interacting with you, and that they're doing things around your house. You magically end up with things going missing, especially when they're super important. Maybe when they took it, you probably upset it somehow, and it has taken your things. And until you find out how you disrespected nature and upset it, it's not going to give you back your shit.
I'm out of it. Like I said, you know, they could, if you want, they were specifically saying that they were the Moonite people, and I was like, I'm out. I'm out.
Like, yeah, no,
I am out.
I'm not even going to entertain none of this, none of that conversation. This is bad medicine. You're gonna make things follow you and find you. And like, I have like somewhat sight for different kinds of things, right? Because like whenever I watch like paranormal streams on TikTok, right, I can usually see like the different things they're interacting with, right? But very faint. I don't have like clear vision the way other people have clear vision when they have like abilities to do things like that. And the big difference between like actually having sight perception or it being schizophrenia is that there's evidence of what it is that you're seeing. Because you'll say like, oh, hey, I see this thing over here. It's fixed to interact with something. And then sure enough, it sets off the little light on like whatever little sensor it was. Or it'll move a balloon that somebody has floating there. Or it'll creak open the door or something like that. And that's why you can tell the difference between schizophrenia or abilities to see things and sense stuff. And the thing is like, certain things that you sense have never been people before. And they don't understand that these things that they're interacting with or half-ass mentioning and stuff ain't people. They don't interact like people, and they don't like communicate like how people communicate. So to go off and try and use their names and then like try and say that they're affiliated with that or they come from those, this and that, those things are gonna come find you and bring you back home, bro. Like and science, and I'm just saying science-wise, and correct me if I'm wrong, Widda. They're finding new species of hominin all the time.
Yes.
There's 6 different DNA ghost species that are prevalent in Native American tribes of like different nations and stuff like that. So far, they've discovered like 6 different ghost species, and the whole reason they call them ghost species is because they have the genetics on hand and they have different. They don't have the bodies.
We have 7 ghost species now.
And I don't think it's because they don't exist. I think it's because they're like buried in the jungle and stuff, and like they're hard to get to. It's not that they don't exist, but we haven't gotten to them in the places that they come from, because those places are hard to get to. You're gonna have to get through jungle, other indigenous tribes, the flora and fauna that's there, the temperatures and extreme climates that it takes to get through to get over there.
I need to reply to
mentioning different stuff of like different spiritual natures.
I need to reply to something here. So we are talking today about European ancestry. And the reason that the person behind me is Black is because at the point of time in European history, everybody there was still very dark of skin. Up until at least 10,000 years ago, we see that everybody within the European continent is extremely dark of skin. And that's what the DNA shows. My website, in Widda Ord, actually has links to articles that talk about this. When we look at things like Cheddar Man, who's in Britain and 10,000 years old, was the oldest until the last year, when we now have a 14 and 15,000 year old person there, or people there. Cheddar Man himself, the alleles of his skin, because there's about 9 different alleles that apply to how the melanin content, because we all have melanin, actually combines in your skin and actually densifies in your skin, whether or not it's dense or whether or not it's not dense. The alleles for Cheddar Man's skin at 10,000 years ago are identified as sub-Saharan African alleles for skin tone. We know now that Otzi was probably what we would term Middle Eastern brown today. And we know that up until about 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, pretty much everybody within Africa, or at least over 50% of the or not Africa, in Europe, at least over 50% of the population was still very dark of skin. Light skin in Homo sapien is actually a very new phenomena. It's not an advancement. It only works in specific areas of the globe. The advancement is the ability to adapt our skin color. And darker skin is actually helpful on many more levels. So don't take that as, oh my God, Europeans are advanced. It's not that. What it is that in specific areas, light skin is a genetic advantage. And so light skin or any change to our bodies takes about 100 generations to happen. Sorry, my words are dropping, and there's a specific word, adaptation. The adaptations to our bodies take 100 generations to happen. And those 100 generations to happen, you're talking about alleles, right? I'm not exactly sure which alleles you're talking about. Again, this comes from scientific resources, and the website right here will tell you which scientific resources, like it's in this website, the links to journal articles about these items, and this information comes from there. The person behind me is a Gravatian. Gravatian period goes from roughly 40,000 years ago. So I saw a different article that puts the Gravatian period at a different time, and it puts it from the mid 30,000s to the mid 20,000s years ago. Some Gravatian articles will put it from the 40,000 years ago to 30,000 years ago. So it does get all mixed up in the timeline of the Gravatians, but the Gravatians are some of the oldest people that we have in Europe. And the Gravatians, the DNA shows that their skin is dark. We see that everybody's skin is relatively on the darker scale, and I do need to put right here so that you understand that we are talking scales. We're not talking everybody is extremely dark versus everybody is extremely light. We're talking lighter scale versus darker scale, right? Europeans were on a darker scale until much more recently.
She's saying TikTok lost their music rights. She's right though. Today is the day of that.
Oh, that might be why things are not. Oh, okay. Thank you, Crazy. Okay, that's why you were trying to come up. I'm sorry. I've only got a couple people because we're talking about something specific. So TikTok lost its music rights. Does this mean that a lot of videos with music within the background is going to be taken down? Yes. Okay, that makes sense. That makes total sense. Thank you so much, Claire. I really appreciate that information, and I think everybody else does. Yes, my website does talk about the ghost species. It does not have an article about the ghost species here in Turtle Island, only because of the fact that that's an article I have in PDF form that was given to me by a teacher in school, a professor a few years ago. And so I don't have a way to find it for you. I don't know. I've searched online and haven't found an actual link for the PDF. And so I've got to find the PDF link again for that one. It does go through the ghost species, and we currently have 7 different ghost species that we have found. Only one is in Turtle Island in Abiyala. It is a unique one. They're all unique species. And one is in Turtle Island Indigenous people and Abiyalian Indigenous people. Just like there's one in Australians. There's 3 in 2 nations within Africa that do not have Neanderthal DNA, and there's only 2 nations in Africa that do not have Neanderthal DNA prior to colonization. Those 2 nations are the Yoruba people and the Kwe people, and they have 3 ghost species within them. And then we see that there's 1 ghost species is found within Neanderthals and Denisovan, and 1 ghost species, the latest one, is found in Asia. No worries, Cass, no worries. So the ghost species, when you're hearing the conversation about ghost species, a ghost species is a species. So like we see a little bit of the genome of Neanderthal in our species, and we see a little bit of the genome of Denisovan within our species. When we found Neanderthal's genome in the fossil record and we found Denisovan's genome within the fossil record, having those genomes within the fossil record gave us the ability to understand the genetics that we saw in ourselves. So say you see a gene. I don't know if I know who's inviting me to co-host. Say you see a gene in our species, and you know it's an Earth-based gene, right? It's terrestrial, but you don't know where it comes from because you don't see it in anybody else, or it's not a sapien-looking gene, right? So if we can find the whole genome of another species in the fossil record, then we can match the gene we see in us to that whole genome. Like we've matched Neanderthal genes to the whole genome for Neanderthal, and we've matched Denisovan genes to the whole genome for Denisovan. We have 7 species that we see both in our genes and in Neanderthal and Denisovan genes that we don't see the whole genome of them in the fossil record yet. Now, it needs to be understood that the only DNAs that we've gotten from the fossil record so far are Neanderthal and Denisovan. We do have other species that we have found, like Naledi, Longi, Luzonensis, Florensis. We haven't gotten the genome from them yet, because to get ancient DNA, you have to have kind of like perfect environment, and you have to get testing done immediately. So when we look at the ancient genome within Neanderthal and Denisovan, first of all, you have to grind up an entire fossil bone to get that genome out of it, to get the DNA out of it. They take that, so to get DNA out of anything that's not alive, what you have to do is you have to take a piece of it and you have to grind it up and make it kind of like a fine powder, and then put like a solution in it, and then you spin it out, and the spinning out prints out a bunch of fucking numbers. Do not understand this well enough. It is not my area of not expertise, but focus. So
That's
if
a liquid exchange, and what happens is like they basically separate it. Like I'm big
go ahead.
nerds and stuff like that, and so like it just kind of depends on what type of fossil it is that they use. Because at last I remember, and mind you, I only remember because different tidbits of things kind of unlock stuff for me, like mentally, because I do like info dump, like learning. So I'll go in a scroll hole, learn lots of things, and then my brain kind of like puts it away until like somebody mentions it, and then it's almost like that box gets open. So you mentioned that made me remember like different documentaries I've watched and things that I've researched. And basically, depending on if it's like a tree fossil, plant kind of thing, if it's a person type fossil, or if it's an animal fossil, they have different protocols and like procedures for DNA extraction. Because the kind of DNA extraction you would do with a human fossil versus the kind of DNA extraction you could do with like a frozen mammoth specimen would be 2 different things, because of like level of fossilization, how many mineral deposits get put into it, stuff like that. So yeah, there's like a very intense process with it, depending on what kind of a fossil it is you're trying to like recover genes from.
Absolutely. Well, and there's also been a lot of changes in the last 10 years. So when we were talking about the Bad Durenberg shaman, to get her DNA, they literally had to grind up her entire femur. Yet nowadays, to get somebody's DNA out of a fossil, or to try at least, they only need like I think it was like 1/32 of an ounce. Like, it's a very small amount of bone dust. Um, and when we talk about fossils, when we talk about humans, um, anything that is pre a couple hundred years ago is considered a fossil. It's not like that it is mineralized already. Like when we talk about fossils for like trees and things like that, those are fossils that have mineralized. Like, most of us were taught in grade school that fossils were something that was mineralized, right? Like something that had almost become stone, right? Now we know that fossils are not now we know. Within anthropology and archaeology, we call the remains of our species and the prior species that are along our species line fossils, even though they haven't fossilized. Just so people are aware. I didn't know that before I went to school, because that means it's turned to bone already or stone already.
Kind of things that they call them, just depending on where they get found and stuff like that. Because the kind of a fossil or artifact that you're going to find in a desert climate, it's going to be different than a fossil you would find like at the bottom of a cenote, which is somewhere where they've like actually extracted fossils and like different artifacts from.
Absolutely. Well, and there's also the fact that like and this is what I was saying with the DNA itself. So if talking about different environments, if something is found in a very cold, dry environment, or in the bottom of water, usually high acidic, I think, or acidic environment, water like bogs and cenotes and stuff like that, in the bottom of a water fully submerged, they'll last longer in those 2 incidences than they will in a hot, dry environment or a hot, wet environment. Hot, wet environment will degrade things faster than anything else, which is why we don't have DNA from Naledi, and we don't have DNA from Homo florensis because they're both in hot, wet environments. And are because Naledi, even though they're in South Africa, the Rising Star cave system is actually a damp cave system. And so because they're both in hot, dry environments, those hot, dry environments make it harder for the DNA to last in the bone. And so they haven't gotten it from them. So to tie that back into the ghost species, we don't know for certain if those ghost species are species we haven't found yet. We know that we haven't found the DNA of them yet. We have little chunks of DNA from species that we have not identified yet within ours, little genes that attribute to us in different ways. Like Denisovan has a gene for high altitude oxygen production. And they believe this is why, or not production, but livability. And they believe that this is why the Tibetan people are better able to live in that environment because they got that gene from the Denisovan people. So there are little pieces of little genes within us that they haven't identified where they came from. They just see them in us. And so that is what a ghost species is. It's kind of a ghost in the us, right? We don't know where it came from. We can see it. We know it's there. We see a faint outline of it. Like you can see the Denisovan DNA is a DNA for oxygen in the gene itself. It's a high altitude oxygen gene, right? And so you can see little genes within us that give us ideas of who these species were, yet you can't see who these species were as a whole.
Can I just, food for thought?
Mm-hmm.
So I did some reading, and it said that there are 3 billion lines of code in DNA that we can read. We need to humble ourselves. This is not the end of technology.
Right.
Tomorrow, we could discover new ways to read, things and figure things out, okay? But with 3 billion lines of code, you said it takes 100 generations to permanently change something about us, right? That's 100 generations, not years. People are getting it wrong. Apparently, you must have said that before, because I've had people come into my life and say, do you think that people can change in 100 years? And I said, no, it would take far more generations. And I wasn't sure. So if you looked it up and it's 100 generations.
Yeah.
That sounds a little bit more plausible to me.
It is 100 generations, 2,500 years currently, because currently we are considering every generation for sapien to be 25 years.
Okay, that makes sense. And with that being said,
One of my aunts and myself to show y'all.
With that being said, if I tell you, hey, would you look this thing up in history? You might turn towards books, and maybe, being who you are and as well read and intelligent as you are, you might also consult oral dictation from people from that area, as close to the source as possible, right? This is how we think to look up history. That's how we record history, through oral dictation, or we write it down, or pictures, or something like that. But biology also keeps track of history.
Yeah.
And that's how those lines of code. And so every victory, every failure, every starvation, famine, and feast that your ancestors had is an indelible mark on your blood. It's there forever.
Yeah.
It is that we are so sensitive that makes us so strong and highly adaptive.
I think that's very true. It's 100 generations for all species, right? Yet I think that the fact, so we actually, Dr. Melanie Chang said this once in an interview that I heard, where she said, we actually have less genetic diversity than most other species, right? Because we only have 25,000 genes that are unique to our species. We have all of those other, all of that other DNA coding is DNA coding that's shared with all these other species on the planet, right? Like, you'll hear people say we have 95% of our DNA is shared with bananas, or 99% of our DNA is shared with the rest of the planet, or things like that. And I don't know what the exact number is, but the vast majority of our DNA is shared with the rest of the planet. The unique genes within us are only 2,500, which is actually very small for genetic diversity is the statement that Dr. Shang was making that was really impactful to me. So we're not really high on the genetic diversity scale. We like to think that we are, like, because of the fact that we have what we think of as physical. So we think that we have greater physical variation than most things do, yet it's not necessarily that we have greater physical variation than most things do. It's that we can't see the physical variation in other species as well as we should, right? Like, and we don't even see our physical variation as well as we should. So it's just never what we think it is. It's never what we think it is. Go on, Cass.
I think the easy way to break it down for people to like visualize it easier is think about the diversity between a hummingbird versus an ostrich.
Where and where?
The diversity between people. Like if you think about the diversity of like the genetics and how they play out for a hummingbird versus for an ostrich. Those are two different kinds of birds, and they are vastly different. But if you think of like the two most different people on Earth, like someone with I don't know, like dwarfism versus somebody with giantism going on. Like that's still like not anywhere near as much of a difference compared to like if you were to compare a hummingbird to an ostrich. Also, with genetics taking many generations to change, that's a picture of my aunt in the background.
That's awesome.
And you see how I look very similar to her.
Yeah, you can absolutely see the similarity. And I think that that's real. I mean, are you talking to us, Inc., or someone else?
I'm at the VA. I'm being bad at multitasking.
Don't worry. Go right ahead. I just wanted to make sure that you knew you were muted. So when we're looking at the 25 years, I can't maths off the top of my head. So for us, it's 25 years. So to find out what 25 generations would bring, it's a quarter of the 25,000. So 25 times 1,000, 25,000, 2,500, 25. I don't math. And I could have been leaving a zero off. It could be 25,000 instead of 2,500, or I could have been adding a zero instead 25,000 instead of 2,500. But it is 25 times 100 generations, basically, not 1,000, so 2,500. So if you do 25 times 25, you're looking at a quarter of that. And it's not that, I want to make sure we know that it's not that it's a permanent, because we can adopt back, right? If a family line say, skin color is the one that everybody is so focused on. If a family line was up north in, Siberia, they will have gotten lighter skin being up north in Siberia. And then if they were to move back and spend 100 generations down in South Africa, where they may have originally come from, they'll adapt back. Also, skin color is one of those things that's not just dictated by your genes. It's also dictated by the environment of the mother while you are in the womb. So you will be slightly darker or lighter than your mother, depending on the environment that you're in, just like you're slightly taller than your parents. These things are adaptations to space. They're things that are adaptation to, the environment around us, which again, that ability to adapt is the thing that is special about us. We, as a species, we like to think of ourselves as so unique and so special and so different, and we're greater than anything else on this planet. The fact of the matter is that we're not. We're not the most intelligent species on this planet. There are several species that are considered to be more intelligent than us. We are not the most compassionate species on this planet. There are other species that are way more compassionate than us and don't turn their compassion off, right? We're not the most empathetic. We like to articulate things in a permanence. And so other species have no need to articulate in a permanence, meaning, and the need to articulate in a permanence is new for us. Like the need to have things that exist forever, the need to be eternal is new to us. And so there is levels of civilization that has been built before that, has faded into the dust because of the fact that they weren't built on the idea of permanence that modern civilization is built on, that Western thought process is built on. So we're not the most intelligent, we're not the most capable. One thing that we are that's extremely unique about us is that we are a species whose uh, adaptations get adapted. No other species really adapts their adaptations. Other species can adapt things. They can adapt their surroundings. Other species can create tools. Yet they don't take those tools a step further. They don't save those tools for later and tweak them out, right? We do those things. So we adapt our adaptations, right? Because of,
We're not even, sorry.
go ahead.
We're not even the smartest hominin because Homo naledi broke the EQ scale.
Oh yeah.
The brain size and what they were doing at the time. Like, we need to humble ourselves. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. That's a statement that we need to frequently make. We need to humble ourselves. There is this idea that we're supposed to be humble to others, but there's no thought process that we're supposed to be humble on the broader scale of things, that we are just a part. And I think, really honestly, I always take it back to what Robin Wall Kimmerer says in Braiding Sweetgrass. On one side of the world, there was a mother, a woman whose, life was created about the co-creation of the good green earth, right? The co-creation, the co-working, the being a part of the larger biome. And on the other side of the world was a woman whose only purpose here was trial and tribulation until she gets to her home in heaven, right? That this is not home, right? And for me, it always equates back to humbling ourselves. We have to understand that we are not as separate as we want to place ourselves, and that our need to be separate, our need to be above, is really kind of twisted, and it really is damaging to our species as a whole. Like, it's killing us, right? It's not just killing the planet, but it's killing us as well. I wasn't sure if somebody was trying to speak, so I wanted to make sure.
Such control issues and demands to be in charge the way humans demand to be in charge of things.
I don't know if that's breaking up just for me, but that's breaking up a little bit, Cass. Brain size isn't related to intelligence. That's true.
Yeah, Homo naledi broke that scale.
And I think that's an important concept, that brain size isn't about intelligence. It's about the neural speed and the connectivity. With us, one of the things that does set us apart is we have a high malleability in our brain thought process. And that is because of how many life stages we have between our birth and how many brain stages we have between our birth and the fully function of our brain. You want to try again, Cass, and see if you're not breaking up now?
Check.
Gotcha.
Okay, I was trying to say that there's no other species besides humans that demand to be in charge and demand to have control over their environments the way humans do. Everything else lives here is fine with having enough space to just live and exist and to be able to raise families, have offsprings. I mean, the only thing that getting that's the horse. Like, other animals might just store away extra supplies for the winter, like how squirrels put away nuts and different things in little hiding spots. But to actually have control over other individuals, over other beings, and over like territories in like full ownership, that's only a human thing. Other animals don't do that. They might be territorial, they might like space and to like keep it for themselves, but they don't demand to have to like change it, rule over it. They don't demand to have like rulership over the other things that exist in their environment the way humans do.
That's a very real point. And I think it reminds me of the fact that I see that hoarding and that need to have rulership over things is a newer concept within our species. Of course, I'm talking in timelines of hundreds of thousands of years. So newer to me is 10,000 years old. But it is a newer concept within our species. It's not something that's natural within our species. It's something that I personally see as having come about because of the fact that we are, because of the need of hoarding. I believe that hoarding comes from trauma. And I believe that trauma starting at 10,000 years ago has to do with the changes in the environment and the changes in agricultural thought process of 10,000 years ago. And I think that the reason that we hoard now and the reason that we are into this idea of power over each other and over other species at the point that we are now is because of having that trauma, having a huge amount of, I've said it before in here, and to me, it's narcissistic God King, right? But I believe that the narcissistic God Kings come about through trauma. I believe that the reason that they're behaving that way is because of the trauma of their childhood, and that the reason that they hoard is because they lacked. And when we lack, we turn around and hoard. I think epigenetics has a huge, huge role to play in it. And I think that, again, like we can adapt something out, we can adapt something in, right? If we can adapt it out, we can adapt it back in. If we can take it out, Haven, if you're still in here, saw your text, you're fine. If we can adapt it out, we can adapt it back in. And so I think that if we can adapt narcissistic personality disorder in, we can adapt narcissistic personality disorder out. But I do think that it's only 10,000 years ago. And I think that it is hoarding, and that is a difference. It's a new difference. We're hoarding. We've decided that not only should we have power over each other, but we should have power over others, and we should have power over the planet. And to me, it goes back as well with that, or it ties in as well with that need to be eternal, right? That need to have this eternity, that we're here for eternity. To me, it all cycles back to the dark triad, right? This belief that you are a God, that you are special, that you are important, right? That there's something about you that sets you apart, not only from the rest of the animals and the planet, but from each other, from everything else, and makes you more important, and everything should subject and servitude to you because, right? But I think that is a very important point. We are the only species that does that, right? We are the only species that has that mutation of our genetics to create that. And I think that mutation comes through trauma.
How long ago was it that we started seeing signs of violence in humanity, and where was that?
So the first,
we'd like somebody to blame it on.
The first incidents that we have
Mesopotamia.
Actually, before that, the first incidents that we have that I've seen archaeologically is about 12,000 years ago. Maybe it's 9,000, and I might be confusing my dates. But the first thing that we know for a fact this is violence upon violence is roughly that long ago in Kenya, and it's a massacre. It's our first incidence of a massacre, and it's 8 people lined up together, tied up, obviously, by the positioning of their hand and their feet. One of them was pregnant, and her hands was tied underneath her belly, and they were all executed from behind, basically. So the rise of violence that we see in the archaeological record, though, starts it starts roughly 12,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, like, because we have so few skeletons during this time frame, right? So we see that during that time frame there is a rise of violence. I've mentioned this one before, that everything we have before that, we have roughly 2,000 skeletons. And of them, roughly 2% of that could possibly be attributed to violence. Like if I see a skull with that's been caved in by a rock, I can't tell you if that rock was held by another person, or if that rock fell from the top of a cave or fell from a landslide, right? So things that could possibly be attributed to violence, we see 2%. After 10,000 years ago, we see that 2% rise to roughly 18 to 20%. And we see that change from possibly be attributed to definitive. Well, we do see some of our earliest signs of violence in parts of Africa. We also see them at the same time frame in what we call the Near and the Middle East today, right? For a long time, this is actually attached to the mainland continent of Africa. It's not a specific space that's different from the rest of Africa. Um, and this is because we see these often attributed to a change in resource gathering and a change of ways of gathering resourcing. It's really farming that brings this about. It's really the idea of monocrop agriculture um, that is seeing the steady rise of violence, right? Though we see that the earliest monocrop agriculture starts at like 15 to 18,000 years ago along the Nile, and we do not see violence rising there, and we do not see or until later, and we do not see uh, violence at that. When we see violence rising later, it's not our earliest signs aren't along the Nile. Like our earliest signs aren't where we see the earliest signs of agriculture. That sounds like a good book.
Was that I don't remember exactly what the theory is called, but it was almost like the plentiful theory or something. I don't remember, but it's basically stating that the whole reason that civilizations on the Western hemisphere had like time and ability to create like all the different pyramids they made and astrological discoveries and studies of astronomy and different things that they did and advancements as civilizations and cultures is due to the fact that they had plentiful resources here. So because they didn't have to struggle anywhere near as much because the land was so like plentiful, that's what gave them the time to be able to do things like develop mathematics, study astronomy, develop sciences, do like agriculture and different things like that. And that when you have environments where resources are plentiful and people don't have to struggle for survival and they don't have to struggle for nourishment, it gives them the ability to be able to advance themselves and put their energies towards other things like arts and science.
Well, and for me, that's why people argue over what civilization and rise of civilization is, or how we can tell a civilization. And I had a video because I had answered somebody's question in an interview about, what does anthropology consider the rise of civilization? I said I disagree with what we currently consider civilization. But I had a professor once who said that civilization is when you see an abundance of food. You can track the start of a civilization by when you see the abundance of food. And this is the professor of the Middle East, actually, like our Near East. Like he's the one that taught me, the basis of Western thought. This is the person that I get my information on Sargon from and the rise of Mesopotamia from, right? And he said, I think that, I can track the start of civilization when food is plentiful. My disagreement with it, I think, is when food is plentiful and it is shared. It is when every member of your community is able to eat, is able to, fulfill their physical needs or their biological needs so that their brains can think. Because when you can give people food, then they can sit down and they can conceive and they can build and they can do other things instead of needing for food.
Do you remember the discovery of the man with the broken femur? It was told to me that there was a discovery that is regarded as one of the first signs of civilization, and that is a healed femur. And this is because, well, I mean, you obviously instantaneously know it takes a long time to heal a femur. So when this person, and I think it may have actually been a Neanderthal, I'll have to double check, but not only did they have the medicine, right? But the community took time to care for this completely helpless person. If you break your femur, you're helpless. For all the time that it took for this person to heal, their community pulled together. So that is an interesting study. I'll have to look it up to be able to cite it properly. But if you look it up, first signs of civilization, broken femur or healed femur.
I agree with that. I haven't heard of the broken femur being the start. I mean, not that I registered. It doesn't mean that I haven't. It's just that I registered. I always, so Kreb from the Earth's Children series from Genome All is real, right? From Planet of the Cave Bear, Kreb is real. Kreb is female, not male, but Kreb is actually a find. It's called Shanidar 1. And Shanidar 1 shows the injuries that Kreb has. And the injuries that are shown is like the right skull side of the skull is caved in, pretty much completely deaf, lack of sight in one side and kind of dim sight in the other side, one arm having shriveled up and like died away basically, and one leg doing the same thing, atrophied. And so this is like 90,000 years old. This is medicine, right? Because what this shows is exactly that. Somebody had to stay with this person. So the idea is that Krebs was injured, and that's why his skull was caved in. This is an injury. And the thought process is this injury happened relatively not young, but younger. And that's why his leg and his arm is atrophied. That's why his sight and his, so somebody had to stay with him through that injury and heal him through that injury. The 31,000-year-old foot amputation that we've talked about in here frequently shows absolutely somebody had to stay with that person while they learned to walk again. Somebody had to make sure they were fed. And it is understood usually within anthropological circles that is an extremely huge indication of community and of the idea of where we go from being animals that don't really think about each other, right, to taking care of each other, where community starts becoming more important, because of the fact that when we look at that, what we are looking at is exactly what you stated. Somebody has to be there while that injury heals. Somebody doesn't need to be there while your arm injury heals. Somebody needs to be there while your skull injury heals. Somebody needs to be there while your leg injury heals, if it's the kind of injury that you need to learn to walk again, or you can't walk for a specific indication of time. If somebody is not there to take care of you, you die. In animals versus humans, there's not often animals that will stick by. That doesn't mean there's no animals that will stick by, and there are primates that will stick by, but there's not often animals that will stick by a broken bone that keeps somebody from walking, that keeps somebody from being able to move about, or an injury that keeps somebody from being able to move about, right? When you're recovering from childbirth, that's another huge one. Well, and childbirth itself is unique within Homo sapiens. We are the only species on the planet currently. One other species had this as well. That's Neanderthals. And that's mandatory midwifery. We must have somebody assist us in our childbirth. And this is because of the way that the infant turns as the infant is leaving the body. The nose is facing backwards as the infant is being born. Great apes, for instance, the infant is relatively much smaller compared to the pelvic outlet. And the infant is facing forward as it's being born. And so the great ape can pull the infant from their body just straight up and put it on their chest. Whereas us, our infants being born with their nose facing backwards, you can't pull a child backwards out of you, because if you do, you will break their spine as they're coming out, because we don't turn that fucking way. So, and the shape of our head versus the shape of our shoulders and the shape of the pelvic outlet and the way it's tilted means that as our infants are coming out, they start with their nose facing backwards. We have to do a quarter turn to get their head out of our pelvic passage, right, our birth canal. And then we have to turn another quarter turn to get the shoulders out, because the head goes one way and the shoulders go the other way. And so we actually have to turn them twice. And so they start facing backwards and end facing forwards. This is mandatory midwifery. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of us can touch inside ourselves in ways that we could actually reach down and pull that child out if we absolutely fucking needed to. Yet there's still a lot of other things about childbirth that for us can be pretty problematic, and for us really need the care of others to ensure that we're healing properly, that we're safe after the fact. And because our newborns are not snakes, they don't move away the moment they're born, or horses, they don't walk the moment we're born, and our bodies need care and the newborn's body needs care. These are signs of the need for community. It doesn't mean other species don't have or need community. It means that community is mandatory for us. We must have community. If we do not have community, we do not survive. We do not thrive. Even today, when you think that you're doing it all on your fucking own, you have a community. Hi, Mia. I think we are actually unique in the problematic issues with birthing young. I I can't say for certain because I don't study other animals as much, and I have not specifically heard that statement, but I think so. Cass might be saying something about it. I know she has a lot of information. Nope, she's leaving. Cool. Oh, not cool that you're leaving, but
on purpose to tease us.
she did. She was like giving us shit, and then she popped out. I know she's in the middle of the VA, and it could be, man, I have to always put my.
Whatever's going on is getting worse because I had to have C-sections.
Yeah, yeah. I was a C-section baby. I was lucky that I didn't have to have a C-section, but I was a C-section baby. I think it has to do with the way we're living. And I think it has to do with our medical care. And I think it has to do with the fact that we're not supposed to give birth on our backs. We're supposed to give birth sitting up. Gravity is supposed to help that. We're supposed to be squatting when we give birth. The only reason we give birth on our backs is because I think it was Louis the 14th or Louis the 13th had a huge fascination with watching childbirth. It was his kink. And so it was easier for him to watch childbirth if the woman he was kinking over giving birth was doing it on her back. And so that is literally the reason that we actually give birth on our backs instead of giving birth squatting. There used to be birthing chairs, which could be very helpful, but this is still giving gravity the flow. And then we also see around that time that there is a change from midwives to men taking care of childbirths. And midwives were less likely to lose a patient and were less likely to have problems during childbirth. That doesn't mean that there were no problems because, there's always going to be, even other species lose babies. I mean, that's part of how you keep species in check, right? Part of how you ensure that babies with abnormalities that aren't livable aren't born, right? So that you're not ensuing trauma, right? That's part of like life, right? That's just part of life. Every species loses babies, right? Not as many species loses moms in childbirth. And I do believe that we are probably the most problem within childbirth. I also do believe that the amount of problem that we have in childbirth is man created. I believe not only so we see within most ancient groups, even within
male.
Yeah, specifically male. Specifically male, kink created. Let's be real here. Male kink and male money, because the reason that male doctors took over childbirth instead of the midwives who were doing childbirth up until then is because of the fact that this is when we're starting to see the introduction of medicine, again within Europe, instead of the anti-science crowd that Christianity creates. And then because we're starting to see the start of medicine coming back up within Europe, we're seeing that the and literally they were butcher barbers, or like your barber dentist kind of thing. They were talking about barber surgeons is another word that they used for them. A part of this is the fact that they weren't allowed to do most surgeries. They could cut something off, but they couldn't actually like cut into somebody. And because of the fact that they weren't very educated, like this, their main fucking thing might be fucking cutting your hair or taking out, taking out your teeth and shit like that. They weren't fucking very educated. And this is because in Europe for a long time, you actually had to go to Islamic run countries to get education on medicine, because Europe considered medicine to be against God. And so you couldn't learn medicine within Europe for an extended period of time. So at the time when you see, midwives being removed as the care for patients in childbirth, is because these barber surgeons are doing their best to try and get an income again. And they're like, well, I should have this because I'm a man and I know everything because I went and I studied this newfangled medicine thing. And so, I need to have this income. And so really the reasons that we have problems in childbirth are, not only men created due to kink, but it's men created due to finance, right? The need to have all the wealth, the need for the wealth to be money, and the need to have all of it. So it is very much, and I don't think it's natural for us to have as much trauma as we do in childbirth. I don't know a woman who doesn't have at least one of her childbirth stories is traumatic, like whether it's the doctor was a complete and utter fucking dickwad, or, something else is going on. I don't know a woman that doesn't have at least one traumatic childbirth story that has children. Um, and I know that this acerbates completely due to skin color within the United States. If your skin color is darker within the United States, the issues that you're having around trauma within childbirth is exponentially greater than anybody else. We're already having issues, right? Again, I don't know one woman who has not had a traumatic childbirth. That doubles, triples, quadruples, both in the trauma and in the amount of traumatic childbirths, as in like a white woman might have one traumatic childbirth out of three, and a black woman might have three traumatic childbirths out of three childbirths, right? That trauma doubles because of the racism within medicine, right? And also because of the fact that we don't do a lot of study of this stuff on women. They don't test birth controls on girls, birth control pills on girls. They test birth control pills on guys because, when we're dealing with the womb, we should go and look for the people that don't have the wombs to test the womb shit out on, right? Like that sounds logical and reasonable.
They have birth control for men, chemical birth control, hormonal birth control, and it works. And the side effects are less than that women have.
Yes.
And here's the thing. They can't market it.
No.
Men won't get a runny nose for birth control. Yet we're completely responsible.
Oh, 100%.
To get pregnant when they tell us to.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And don't you dare get rid of it. Somebody gave you that. Why would you get rid of it? Somebody gave that to you.
Yeah, but don't get pregnant when they don't want you to get pregnant.
No. But if you do, don't get rid of it. Give it to somebody else, maybe.
But don't charge him to support his own child.
Not even close. Not even close. It's fucking weird out there.
Don't expect him to nurture the child. That's another thing. It's very, very strange to me to see men who are not interested in their seed.
Well, and for me, I think what's very interesting to me is, and we've talked about this in here before, so that communal need that we have, right? That communal need that we have is all of us. We all need to be communal. And because we have 5 life stages from neonate to adult, what we were talking about with that brain malleability. We have 5 stages of brain development from the moment that we're born to the moment of full brain closure, which is currently 25 years. Because of that, during those time periods, our brains are gathering such an abundance of information over an extended amount of time that we have to have somebody care for us in a level that no other species has. Snakes hatch and run away. Horses are born and can run, right? Snakes never meet their mama, right? Unless she kills them, right? The other species don't have that need to nurture because other species don't have the brain development period from newborn to adult. We have the need to nurture. That nurture cannot just be a singular person nurturing that infant, because we have the need for community, because a singular person cannot meet all of an infant's needs. A singular person cannot meet the need for water, for nutrient, and for the mother, so that the mother can nutrize the infant, and cannot meet the need for protection, cannot meet the need for shelter, and cannot meet the need for protection from the environmental factors like heat, cold, animals, right? You cannot
realize that's literally what biology has their testosterone levels set there for. That's literally. I read a study. Men go through hormonal changes if they stayed throughout the pregnancy.
Yes.
If they stay throughout the pregnancy only, and they will go through biological changes that changes their hormone levels, and they will be more alert, stronger. They could, you could bulk up while your woman's pregnant. I'm just saying.
I've known men who've experienced morning sickness because their partner is pregnant. I've known men who have put on weight because their partner put on weight. I've known men who put on more weight than their partner because their partner put on weight. I know men who had morning sickness when their partner didn't have morning sickness. I know men who, I mean, like, you can experience so many hormonal changes. So, if you believe in science, then you understand that energy is the factor that we're all made of, because we're all made of an atom, and atom is energy, right? So we're all made of energy. All that energy interacts with each other scientifically. All that energy interacts with each other. So if you look at it as an energy interaction, being in the company of somebody whose energy interaction is changing is going to affect your energy interaction. If you look at it as a hormonal or a chemical interaction on that level in a scientific sense, we understand the sense that somebody gives off that are created by the hormones that somebody has affects us, right? We understand that we might smell things that we don't even know we're smelling. We understand that there are signals being put off by energy and by chemicals within our body that creates signals within our own body, right? So all of those things are very logical, and people just don't want to understand them as a logical, like, it's just not there on the logical level for people. For me, I think that a lot of people don't grasp logic anymore.
I'm sorry, if a man's not big enough to pick up a little child, and I mean, he's just not strong enough for me.
I do know about the Cerruti Mastodon site. I can go ahead and talk about the Cerruti really quick, Okimo. So the Cerruti Mastodon site is 130,000 years old here in Turtle Island. It is at the San Diego Natural History Museum. It was a site that was uncovered first by non-paleoanthropologists because of the fact that it was thought to be just a mastodon site. It was found, it's named after the person who found it. It was found in an excavation. Robert Cerruti, I think was his name. And first they called in paleontologists, which are different than paleoanthropologists. And then the paleontologists looking at the site went, that's not just mastodon bones. Those mastodon bones are broken in specific ways. And there's some hammerstones and cobblestones in among those mastodon bones. Hammerstones and cobblestones are very specific to hominins. And what they are is they are usually a flat topped stone that can kind of sit in the ground, and usually a flat bottom stone that you can pick up and you can hit the flat top stone. They're what we call expedient tools because they're tools that are usually found in the area. You look around, you need to do this, and you look around and you find the tools to use in the area. When we look at the bones, it's a juvenile mastodon. And what we look is that the long bones are broken. And the way that the long bones are broken, the fracturing pattern is fracturing pattern that only happens when a bone is wet. Think of a piece of toast. If you pull it out of the toaster and you smear some butter on it and you try and break it, it kind of tears a little bit, right? It kind of rips a little bit. Whereas if you wait 2 weeks, or you just don't put any butter on it at all, or you let it dry out and you break it, it snaps differently, right? So bone is the same way. When it's still fresh, when it's still wet, it's going to break and it's going to tear differently than 130,000 years later when it's hit by a shovel, right? Which is the alternate claim that these are hit by a shovel. So the bone breakage pattern is significant in the knowledge that that only happens when bone is wet. The hammerstones and cobblestones have chipping pattern on them that is consistent with usage as hammerstones and cobblestones. And the way there is indentations and chippings on the bones left behind shows them being broken. You probably know this. Many people who are not understanding of traditional practice might not know this. But when we're looking at traditional practice, if I go out with 15 people and I kill a mastodon, this is a huge fucking animal. I'm going to take as much as I can. I'm not going to be able to take all of it because I've only got 15 people. We can't carry all of it, but I'm going to get as much of the meat as I possibly can. I'm probably going to get the hide. I'm going to wrap the meat in the hide. And I want to take as much that I can with me. I'm going to want to get the marrow out of the bone. The marrow within a bone, it is highly protein packed. It's really good for brain development. It's really good for sustaining sustenance. And so I'm going to want to get the marrow out of the bone. And then if I'm using traditional tools or older tools, awls and needles become important, and those are not something I can make out of stone. They're something I make out of bone. So I'm going to break the bone so that I can get awls and needles from the bone, and I'm going to break the bone so that I can get marrow from the bone. So I've just killed this mastodon. I need to get out of there before the saber tooth and the giant bears come in, right? Before the other giant predators come in. And to do that, I'm going to gather as much of the meat as I can. I'm going to gather as much of the hide as I can. And then I'm going to break up the bone to get the marrow. And I'm going to get as much of the bone as tools as I can. And so this is what's happened. And then they've left the rest of the kill, which was probably picked apart by animals afterwards. But again, we see juvenile mastodon bones in and among, or what we call in situ, 5 pieces of hammerstone and cobblestone. And the 5 pieces of hammerstone and cobblestone show wear and chipping, and the bones show breakage consistent with a fresh kill's breakage. They were amazingly skilled. What are you showing us, Atira?
I just looked up the Cerruti Mastodon site. These were also
found. I don't know if I can make
Tell
you
me
big.
That doesn't look like some sort of pottery.
Let me see if I can make you big. I can.
See YouTube video on it.
Oh, I love him. If you are not following that human being, that's Milo. If you're not following Milo, the Minuteman, you should be following the Milo, the Minuteman. That's interesting. Okay, I have to look at those.
252 and 258. Let's write that down. 252 and 258. Look at those. That looks like pottery to me. I don't know. I'm not an expert.
I'm going to say it's bone. Okay, so and the reason I'm going to say it's bone, I think that 252 is a bone. I know it doesn't look like it, but the patterning of the wear on it, or like the surface of it looks more bone-like just on the video that I'm looking at, or the picture on the video I'm looking at.
What, like somebody's thumping club?
Huh?
Like somebody's thumping club?
No, like just a natural bone. It looks like it's been broken, but it looks like it's a ball joint is what it looks like to me. Let me write these down. 252. I don't have the hand that I need free. I'm not ambidextrous. Hold on. And 258. Let me look them up because that's interesting. But so 258 looks like might be I don't know. I'm not sure about the pottery just because it looks like 252 looks like pitting, like bone pitting to me. But I'm not sure what it is. Yeah, the patterning on it. But I'll look at it because that's Milo, and that I'll pull up his video on Cerruti Mastodon. I love him. He's fucking amazing. If you're not following him, you should. He's pretty cool. I don't know what his take is on the Cerruti Mastodon site yet because I haven't watched his whole videos on that yet. But and he does debunk some things. And so I want to point out with the Cerruti Mastodon find that there are a lot of scientists out there who are disagreeing with this. The scientists who did this study are the only scientists so far who have even tried to look at the bones. So a lot of the scientists that are disagreeing with the Cerruti Mastodon site out there have not actually taken the time to even talk to the scientists who did the study, who have the bones, who have all the items, because they're all scientists out of the San Diego History Museum. And they haven't actually like interacted with the objects at all the scientists out there that are disagreeing. They're only disagreeing based on the published article. They're not disagreeing based on any evidence or facts, right? So it's important to note that. And again, I don't know what Milo's take is on it, and that's why I would like to state, I'm not sure. I would assume that Milo's take on it is pretty positive, but I don't want to assume either.
Yeah, I just
That's awesome though. That's beautiful.
But yeah, that's incredible. Those look like, I'm sorry, man, that looks incredible. Whatever that is, that's neat.
That is. I'll have to look it up and bring in information on it because that is neat. And it does the shape of it is interesting, right? The shape of it and the way that it. See you, Mast. Have a good night. The shape of it is pretty interesting, and the way that the shape looks on it is pretty interesting. And it does make it look. It does make it look pottery wise. I think that they would have said if there was pottery in it. That's pretty cool. But the shape of it's pretty fucking cool. I like that. And it's very technologically advanced, as was said in chat. Like this knowledge is very technologically advanced at the time. because of the fact that we do know that they're using awls and things like this by this point, at least, because we know that the use of clothing is older. Tailored clothing isn't until about 40,000 years ago that we have evidence of, though. That doesn't mean that it didn't exist before that. It just means that's our earliest evidence currently. And so because of that, hey, Kushi, because of that, it is a little bit less likely to, I would say that it's probably not needles. I would say it's more likely awls, because awls are something that you do use to make tailored clothing, but you use it for other things as well. But that is the Cerruti Macedon sign. And there is, so the Cerruti Macedon site is not actually the oldest site so far in the in North America. Okay, no, just so you know, the Cerruti Macedon site is actually predated by the Local site in Mexico, southern Mexico, and the oh man, I can't remember what all the datings are on Cactus Hill. So the Local site, and that one is also on my website under Rewriting the Western Hemisphere. The Local site is a site that has 3 sets of datings on it. The 3 sets of datings on it, one was done by the original people who dated it. The other one was done by somebody who was disputing it, and the dating that they did was only carbon-14 dating. They didn't do the thermoluminescent dating as well. And then there's a third date on it that was done by another group that was arguing both of the first 2. So the 3 datings on it, the first dating that was given was 250,000 years old. The second dating that was given was 80,000 years old. And the third dating that was given was 800,000 years old. All of these datings are based on where the items found. So what we're seeing is tools and bone broken in specific patterns and cut underneath a layer of ash. And so the datings on it also have to do with an eruption of a volcano that created this layer of ash, right? So yes. And so I personally am going with the 200 to 250,000 years ago, because it is in between all those 3 dates. All of those dates push back the peopling of Turtle Island. All of those dates. Even the 80,000 years ago, currently we look at the DNA separation as being as 54,000 years ago between Turtle Island indigenous people and everybody else, right? So eruption, not meteor strike. The meteor strike would have been earlier, but it is a meteor strike, or sorry, it is eruption from my knowledge of it. And it turned everything to like ash and glass. That is on my website, though, under Rewriting the Western Hemisphere. So Cerruti Macedon is not the oldest. It's just the newest. And the Cerruti Macedon is the most accepted by the archaeological community of the 3 sites. Leakey, which is one of our top respected archaeologists and paleoanthropologists of all fucking time, worked on the Cactus Hill site. And because he states that the Cactus Hill site was so old, because the Cactus Hill site, I can't remember the dating off the top of my head, but the dating on the Cactus Hill site is pretty old. Because he stated the dating on the Cactus Hill site was so old, and again, this is Leakey, like the king anthropologist. Leakey was like ostracized, like they attacked Leakey over his dating of the Cactus Hill site. Yeah, and this is the more acceptable one to anthropologists currently. And I think that the reason is because of the techniques being used on the Cerruti Macedon site. With the Cerruti Macedon site, first of all, it's very cross focus. Like there's paleontologists, there's paleoanthropologists, there's geologists. It's like very cross focus. And then within paleoanthropology, there's different fields. And within paleoanthropology, experimental archaeology is an extremely important field. And experimental archaeology is actually what's helped show the bone breakage and stuff like that, and the tool marks. And so I think it's because of how many different modalities, that's the word I was looking for, modalities of archaeology and anthropology are on it. Absolutely, Von Berry. Which one are you pulling up right now, Atira?
I pulled up the Cactus Hill Archaeological Site.
Nice.
That definitely looks like tools to me. That so many of them together, like you could find one rock that may have been naturally split in whatever, but like so many of them, look at that. That's the same style.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not an archaeologist, so I don't know.
No, I agree with that. I think, well, and for me, I think what it is like, we have so many people within these fields who refuse to, they're so closed-minded and narrow-minded about it. They refuse to see things that change the narrative. And they refuse to see things to change the narrative, I think, is self-preservation in a lot of cases. Like, I feel like there's so many old fucking racists in the fields of academia that they don't want to see that the narrative isn't what they thought the narrative was, because then they have to face their own fucking behavior. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Cactus Hill. And Cactus Hill is still highly under debate. Like, Cactus Hill is still one of those places that is highly under debate over whether or not Cactus Hill is that dating, whether or not Cactus Hill is, like, I think with Cactus Hill, they want to state that what it was that those tools washed down from another site onto this layer or something like that. And so it's not really the dates that they state that it is, and blah, 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 blah. But Cactus Hill is pretty impactful. We have a lot of sites here in the Americas that are predating what we want to think. This is another one of those concepts and processes is where we see that, following mainstream paleoanthropology, following mainstream archaeology can be really problematic. Don't get me wrong. I'm totally also not okay with people deciding that their Google degree tops actual science, right? But Cactus
My
Hill
Google degree does.
but Cactus Hill is, I think, in Texas, if I remember correctly. And it is a paleoanthropological site here in Turtle Island that predates, God, I can't, let me pull up Cactus Hill on my website so that I can remember the dating on it, because I can't think of the dating on it off the top of my head. It hasn't pulled. It is on my website so that you can find it. It's under Rewriting the Western Hemisphere, Pre-Sapien Finds in the Western Hemisphere is, I believe, where Cactus Hill is, or underneath it. Oh, no, it's the Calico site. You should look up the Calico site. That's the other one. Cactus Hill doesn't, it rewrites it, but it is a sapien find, and it isn't as old. It's Cactus Hill is, oh, fuck off. I know I have Cactus Hill somewhere. Okay, maybe not. I need to put Cactus Hill on there because apparently I don't have Cactus Hill on there. I thought I did, but it didn't actually get put on there. The Calico site is the one I was thinking of. And the Calico site is 20,000 years ago, or 200,000 years ago. And then let me look up Cactus Hill. And I can't remember if it's Cactus Hill or the Calico site that Leaky worked on now. I'm sorry. My brain might have transposed those two. That is one of those unfortunate things with Are you on Encyclopedia Virginia? Yeah, Cactus Hill is 18 to 20. That's why it's not on there, because Cactus Hill is 18 to 20,000 years old. And so I know that we have sites that predate Cactus Hill. That's why. And it is the Calico site that I was thinking of when I was talking about, let me double check it before I state that. I believe it is. Yes, it is. Okay, so it is the Calico site and the 200,000-year-old dating on the Calico site that Leakey had. The Calico site is in California. And it is, let me see, the Calico Mountains in California. There's a Myron that works on this, and it makes me wonder if they were an indigenous Myron. Myron is such an indigenous. Like I associate Myron as being indigenous.
Okay,
Everything.
I'm gonna reset.
Okay. Let me. There we go. So the Calico site is the one that Leakey was on, and the Calico site is 200,000 years old. So when we're talking about sites that predate our current understanding here, the Hail Loco site in Mexico, the Cerruti Macedon site, and the Calico site are all on my website under Rewriting the Western Hemisphere and Pre-Sapien Finds. Sapien isn't, so we start at 300,000 years old, right? Or 300,000 years ago, but we don't become solidified as a singular species until 125,000 years ago to 135,000 years ago. And there's not a lot of finds of us outside of Africa, which includes at this time the Arabian Peninsula, because it was not disconnected by the Red Sea or whatever sea that is at this time. There are sites in that area that predate 50,000 years ago. There are a few finds outside of that area that predate 50,000 years ago. For the most part, most Homo sapiens are moving out roughly around 50,000 years ago. Slightly before, but not too much before. We do see that like indigenous Australians are there for 70,000 years ago. We do see that the break in the mitochondrial DNA between those in Turtle Island and Abiyala and the rest of, Asia or Africa is 54,000 years old. So we do, and we are now seeing some current sapien finds, Homo sapien finds in Western Europe at 50,000 to 54,000 years ago. We still, a lot of anything that we find that we consider to be sapien outside, we do not consider to be Homo sapien. We consider it to be sapien, but not before us, but sapien that hasn't fully become us, I guess is the best. Yes. And horse does come from Turtle Island, just like camels come from Abiyala, right? Camels speciate from alpacas. They're a cameloid species, right? The horse evolved here, and the horse doesn't move out until the land bridge, actually. The horse actually leaves during the land bridge. So that's 15 to 18,000 years ago, right? We see that horse makes it over to the Europes at 15 to 18,000 years ago, because a horse starts here, and horse is that backwards migration. One of the things that backward migrates across the land bridge when the land bridge is open. So we do see that horse does start here. Just like, again, we see that all cameloid species start here as well. These sites for hominins, though, would most likely be descendant species of Homo erectus. What do I mean by that? Homo erectus is the first hominid really to leave Africa, and they leave at 1.8 million years ago, and they start moving across the planet. And as they move across the planet, they settle in some spaces. And when they settle in some spaces, they create new species in those spaces. This is how we get Homo heidelbergensis, that then becomes Homo neanderthal and us, right? But Homo heidelbergensis kind of starts in Europe. This is how we get Homo neanderthal, that absolutely starts in Europe. This is how we get Homo denisovan, that starts in Asia, to our understanding currently, though we're not exactly sure where in Asia. There's some different evidences on it, or thought processes, because we just don't have a whole lot of evidence yet on denisovan. Well, we have more than we have on others, but less than we have on others as well. So when we're looking at that, Homo erectus is moving across the planet. And as Homo erectus is moving across the planet, they speciate in different areas. The species that likely made these sites would be, like Neanderthal and Denisovan, a descendant species of Homo erectus making it here. And when they're making it here, they are speciating and becoming a specific species here. And then when Homo sapiens starts migrating across the planet, they come into meeting with that species. Likely that species is a small species genetically, as most species from Homo erectus are small species genetically other than us. And what I mean by that is we're a very populous species, whereas a lot of the other species out of Homo erectus were not. This is because we speciate through convergence and they speciate through isolation. And so by the time sapien gets to Abiyala and Turtle Island, they're encountering another cousin that's here. They're encountering a cousin species that's here. They're enveloping that cousin species within them, so that when they envelop that cousin species within them, that ghost DNA we see in Turtle Islanders and Abiyalians is that cousin species, and they become a part of that cousin species, and that cousin species becomes a part of them, right? Do you mean Indigenous Australians, Okimo? And do you mean Gigantopithecus? Who's Gigantopithecus? Hold on, let me look up Gigantopithecus so I can make sure I have the right. Yeah, I would say no. And the reason why I would say no is because Gigantopithecus is a totally different line of species. It's a totally it's okay. They don't show homo traits. They don't even show, okay, so like we share a genus with Homo erectus. Our genus is Homo. Paranthropus boisei, the genus is Paranthropus and Boisei is a species, but Paranthropus boisei's tribe is going to be hominid is going to be hominid, and our tribe is hominid, whereas Gigantopithecus's tribe is Sivapithecini. And so what it is like we're too separated for if different non-primates, because it's a primate, sorry, not primate, different non-hominid, because this is not a hominid species, different non-hominid species were to create hominids, we wouldn't be able to have children with them, basically. And so I would state no. I hadn't heard that, and I don't believe that this is your thought process or your intention along it, but the thought process seems problematic to me. It's kind of like that thought process and again, I don't think this is your thought process. You're asking a question because somebody said this to you. And so I don't think that you're thinking this. I think that you're going, well, that's kind of weird. So is this real? So I would say that they're not part of the hominin line, so they're not human. Gigantopithecus isn't. So to relate any group of human to Gigantopithecus, yeah, right, exactly. I know it's not your thought, right? To relate a group of human to a non-human ancestor dehumanizes a group of human, right? And so, I don't think that. I don't think it's your thought process, but I think the thought process that is being stated by others has racism in it. Like their thought process is very racist. It's a very dehumanizing thought process to state that, well, these are similar. And if I just say it flat out, please understand that I am making a statement that I do not hold to. If somebody is to state, well, that group isn't human, or that group's related to the apes, that's something that we see a lot of, right? Like that's a group that's monkeys, or that's a group that's apes. That human group is less human because they're a group of apes or monkeys. That's really what this is. And again, I know it's not yours, and I'm not accused. Like, I know. I just want anybody else to know that the people that are stating that to you, the people that are stating that this is the concept, that's a very problematic and racist concept for them to have, right? So they need to actually maybe do some science work. How does that happen? But no, I would state that there's no relation. I do want to restate that we do see that Indigenous Australians are 70,000 years in their space. They are the oldest group of civilization. They're the oldest community civilization outside of Africa. And we do see within Indigenous Australians that there is a site there predating them, the Moy Hill site in Australia. And we also see Indigenous Australians have a ghost species like Turtle Islanders and Aboriginals do. And so between the Moy Hill site, which is again 120,000 years old, and the ghost species within them, I would state that like Turtle Islanders and Aboriginals, they came across another descendant of Homo erectus that was in Australia, and they enveloped that other descendant group of Homo erectus within them when they came across them, and that's what the ghost species that we would see within Indigenous Australians is. And we can see that within Indigenous Australians, their timeline there is not only documented in their DNA, but their timeline there is documented in the petroglyphs that they have. So they're there for ages and ages. And when we look at, like we can see that there is Indigenous Australian DNA and Indigenous Polynesian DNA in people in Abya, which is South America, for those who do not know. We can see that there is, especially like in Brazil, in ancient finds, there is evidence of Polynesian admixture and evidence of Australian admixture. And when we look at Indigenous Turtle Islanders and Indigenous Abyalians, we see that they have Denisovan DNA. And that Denisovan DNA within Indigenous Australians and within Indigenous Turtle Islanders and Indigenous Abyalians shows that they went through Southeast Asia, which is where we get Denisovan DNA for the most part, or well, outside of Turtle Island and Abya, is in Southeast Asia, the islands of the South Pacific and Australia. So there's a lot of evidence that to get to Turtle Island and Abya, instead of passing through Siberia or Northern Asia, the first groups actually passed through Southern Asia and probably Australia and the islands of the South Pacific to get to Turtle Island and Abya. And again, we see that when they get to Turtle Island and Abya, there is already a species here of cousins, a cousin species here that they intertwine with, intermix with. One thing about us is we fuck everything, as bluntly as I can put it. And we, if it's different, we want it. That's one thing that is really big with us. If we see somebody who looks different than us, a lot of times we are attracted to it. And I think this comes from our speciation through convergence, the fact that, you know, we were born. That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, and I honestly, I don't think that you need to go for a master's degree, right? I have degrees because of the fact that Western academia and science won't hear me without degrees. I don't have degrees because I feel that they're necessary to understand or to pass on knowledge, right? I have a degrees so that I'll be listened to by those that have degrees, right? Yeah. And so I think that, you know, honestly, it's more important for you to work and to share than it is to, you know, reach academia's thought process on what you need to do. And that's why I don't go further, specifically for myself, because I don't think that it's necessary to, right? I think that really it's about, I also, for me, I think it's I go into academia or went into academia in part to have some effect on the changes that we need to see in academia. And so that's another part of it, I think. So we've gone through a lot of different topics, but we really haven't done a lot of conversation on what's behind me, right? We haven't really done a lot of conversation on European ancestry. And these are all important topics. Have a great day, Okimo. And we absolutely, like I said before, you know, I'm not here to teach Indigenous thought process, though I am here to share academic knowledge with indigenous groups, especially when it supports our communities, especially when it supports their knowledge so that they can have the evidence to have the weight, like they can say, look, I know that your racist thought process is this, but here's the evidence that stays differently and your own people fucking say it, right? I am here to teach white people how to white people better, right? That is a huge portion of why I'm here. I'm also here because I write and I want people to have access to my writings, right? So, and then because not a prophet, don't follow me. But I also have a message to share, which is that we are nurturing and communal, and this shit is wrong, and we can change it, right? So, I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the ancestry of Europeans and how Europeans are getting to the space, when they're getting to the space, and what we're seeing within that, right? It was asked earlier, why do I have a European ancestor who's Black, right? Because we were all Black for a long fucking period of time, right? Does not mean ethnocentrism is right. It does not mean that the Black people in Turtle Island and Abayalian are the original inhabitants of Turtle Island and Abayala. Yet every single space across this planet, the original people who get there, when they get there, are dark of skin, are, dark of hair, and most likely dark of eyes, depending on where they're migrating from. The reason is because we as a species speciate in a area that has a high amount of sun. And that high amount of sun, Lakeith Stanfield? Who's Lakeith Stanfield? Because, I don't know people like celebrities at all. So does this actually look like somebody? And I had your picture up the other day that you love. And I'm sorry I don't have it up today, but we're not talking about Homo erectus. But I did make sure I put up your bestie, grandma, behind me the other day. We are bringing her back out a little bit more, and I did it specifically, Tamara, with you in mind, because I was like, oh, okay. Okay, that makes sense. I did think that he looked kind of familiar, but I don't do like, I like watching movies, but I don't do very many actors by their name, right? So that makes sense. They probably used him as a frame of reference when they were drawing, because this drawing is okay. So the website that I got this drawing from was actually a article on the Gravatians, and I'm not sure who the artist was on it. The website is absolutely in my profile, but I'm not sure who the artist was for it. So they might have taken that, and because from my understanding, they didn't do this off of a Gravatian skull. They did this based on the Venus statues that we have and on our knowledge of the Gravatian DNA and the Gravatian people, right? We've talked before how, like, by Cheddar men, you're seeing lighter eyes. Yet at 40,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago, when the Gravatians are moving through, you're not seeing lighter eyes yet. And again, this is because of the fact that when Homo sapiens starts, they start in a place that has a lot of sun. And we have benefits within us for having a high sun content area. To protect us from UV radiation or from overdosing from vitamin D, the melanin within our skin gets higher concentrated when we're in higher sun. And there have been studies done by Black anthropologists who have an interest in the archaeology of hair, who have shown and proven that the reason that Homo sapien actually develops as a species with tightly coiled hair is because it's developing as a species with tightly coiled hair. That tightly coiled hair provides a sunshade, and it provides a lattice work, and the lattice work allows air to move through, which cools the skull, which cools the brain, so that you don't boil your brain, right? So as we're moving into space that doesn't have a high sun content, these different adaptations that we speciated with for that high sun content, some of them don't leave as fast as we want to think that they leave. The first thing that we actually see changes within Homo sapien as they're moving out into low sun content areas is the eyes. And the reason that the eyes are the first things that we're seeing changing is because light eyes are made for low light environment. They're in low light environment adaptation. And I have gray eyes. Gray eyes, if I go out in the sun, it hurts. It gives me a headache. I have to shade my eyes or I have to like squint a bit. I wear glasses, so I can't wear sunglasses. So I actually wear a hat most of the time because it's the only way I can get some shade from my eyes. Otherwise, it's painful for me to go out into a high sun, bright sunlit day, right? Um, I'm old, so the low light adaptation doesn't work as well. I must have light now. Yet when I was younger, I could see a lot better in low light, right? So we see that the first adaptation with Homo sapiens is the eyes, and they get lighter for that low light environment. To our understanding, we're not really seeing that in Gravaceans yet. We're probably starting to see the very first of it. We just haven't found human. I don't want to say fossil, so I'm going to say an ancestor. We haven't found an ancestor yet that has lighter eyes. Now, for the 500,000 ancestors probably alive during this time period, we've probably found 10. We have to remember that, we found one ancestor in England 10,000 years ago, on the island of Britain 10,000 years ago. That doesn't mean that he lived there alone. He lived in a community of other people. He's just the only bones that have remained, right? So with the Gravaceans, if all of the people that we have found are dark of eye, then we're not going to associate light eyes with the Gravaceans yet because we haven't found somebody with dark of eyes or light of eyes. If we have a population where maybe 10% of the population is light of eyes, it's unlikely that we're going to find one of those 10%, like just the statistics of it, right? So we can see that just because we're not finding light eyes does not mean that they don't exist. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? Yet it also doesn't mean for a fact that they did exist just because we think that they could have. It just, yeah. Yeah. Brown eyes are really cool. My mom's got brown eyes. They always said I had green eyes or blue eyes when I was younger because my eyes changed from blue to green to gray. It wasn't until I was older that I realized I had brown eyes or had gray eyes, right? Well, my sister has blue eyes, and my father, my stepfather has blue eyes, right? My dad that raised me had blue eyes, and so I always thought I had blue eyes. As you get older, you realize new things. My biological father actually has blue eyes too. No, brown eyes. My biological father actually has brown eyes. And both of my older of my biological brothers has brown eyes, and my younger of my biological brothers has blue eyes. So I'm the only one of all of my siblings that has brown or gray eyes. Everybody else has blue eyes or brown eyes. And I find it interesting that my mother and father, my biological mother and biological father, both have brown eyes, but I have gray eyes. And if you look at the genealogy on both, you can see that going back a generation for both of them, gray eyes are across the board in both of their families. Like they've got aunts and uncles that have gray eyes in both of their families. So you can see where it comes from, but it's one of those cases of recessive genes. Eyes do have recessive or dominant. Mine are actually really gray. You might not be able to see that they're gray right now, but sometimes you can actually see gray in my eyes. And if you look at them really close, you can actually see lines of silver in my eyes. But they'll reflect from a bright blue to a bright green to this kind of a gray storm. They never go brown and they never go darker. They're always lighter. Hazel is like the darker, gray is the lighter spectrum of hazel, basically, right? So like my daughter has hazel eyes. Haven, who many of you guys in here have met, she has hazel eyes, or they have hazel eyes. And their eyes will go from like this pretty kind of a brownish green to kind of a golden to kind of a brown, right? But they're not like the dark brown that my mother's eyes are. My mother's, well, they're warm brown. They're not dark brown, but so they'll switch a bit. That makes sense. That makes sense. I think that the effects of things like light and stuff like that can totally fuck with our eyes. So when we're looking at the first Europeans, we are looking at a group that is dark of skin and dark of eye and has tightly coiled hair. Um, Again, that's because as a species, we needed these things for our species development. These are things that are actually positive attributes for our species. And again, and you'll hear me state this exact same thing several times, just because I need to make sure that no matter who is listening at that moment of time, they hear this. The advantage is not the color of our skin. The advantage is the fact that we can adapt our skin color. The idea that one skin color is a species genetic advantage over another skin color is pretty ridiculous. Each skin color is a genetic advantage in the space that it is adapted for, right? Yeah, it is. Well, and like I said, once you go back, literally like every generation, like on their military roles, every generation as you go back, it says gray for at least half of the siblings on both sides of the family, and some of my grandparents themselves. It's actually pretty prevalent within the family line. I think personally it's because a lot of this stuff I think is really because of how mixed I am, because I am so very mixed. And so I think that the more mixture we get, the more different things that we get, right? The broader scale. We have more of a genetic lottery to play from, basically, I think. And so I think it has to do with that to some extent. But as you go back, gray eyes are actually, as you go back, they're one of the more prevalent colors of eyes in my family history. We see a lot of gray eyes, and we see a lot of, at least in the things where you can find documentation and roles, like in the stages where you can find documentation and roles, there's a lot of gray eyes. And there's more gray eyes than there are blue eyes. There's a lot of gray eyes, and there's a lot of brown eyes as you go back through my family history lines. So when we're looking at European ancestry and we're looking at those adaptations are happening over an extended period of time. And those adaptations that are happening over an extended period of time, just like I've stated in here before, like if grandma was a Homo erectus and mom was a Homo heidelbergensis and dad was a Homo antecessor, you're not going to see them as being different. You're going to see them as mom and dad, right? This idea that we look at people, and see these vast differences is a relatively new thing within our species. And it's a relatively new, or it's an issue that has really caused problems and has really created, right? And it's created to cause problems, right? So when we're looking at these older generations or ancestors of Europeans within Europe, we see that these older ancestors, as they're moving through Europe, are so by 40,000 years ago, they've spent 10,000 years within Europe, because we see that the first ancestors within Europe at this new, the latest knowledge shows that the first ancestors within Europe are arriving in Europe at 50,000 years ago. We see that many of these groups share similar cultures, yet not similar genetics. So we see, like within the Gervasian culture, that there are 3 different genetic communities that share the same cultural thought process and understanding. And we're seeing that there is in the Gervasian community that lays the furthest to the east, so pretty much over the Italian peninsula, we're seeing that we're looking at a community where the genetics that change over time are the male genetics that change over the time, which means that there's more likely a matrilineal descent within that genetic community. This is because when you have a matrilineal, so we can tell descent through DNA within a community by tracking whether or not the DNA that comes from outside is matrilineal or the DNA that comes from outside is patrilineal. So if you get new wide DNA influxes within the community, then you have a community where the women stay and they get men from outside. To prevent inbreeding, we always get our partners for bearing children from a different community. We don't get our partners for bearing children from within our community, unless we can truly genetically. It's just less likely. It doesn't not happen. It's just less likely due to the fact that as a species, we absolutely have understood prior to science that incest is bad. I mean, there are absolutely different communities, especially through lines of kings, that did not believe that incest was bad. It was a way to maintain power. Yet I would argue that every maintenance of power is negative. I don't think that maintenance of power is a positive for a species development or a positive for us ourselves on any level. So we do see within the community, especially to the west, that there is a new new Y DNA coming in, which could very well indicate that that group, not species, community of Gravatians, that group is a matrilineal culture. Now, because that there is also an evidence of a replacement of a Y DNA, it could also be because of a loss of a men within the group, or because of not or a loss of a men within the group due to trauma. We also see that there is a replacement of Y DNA as they move from northern regions down south during basically the last cold snap, the last freeze that we have, and before they move back up. And so that replacement comes while they're down south. So this could be that the community is moving down south back along the Mediterranean, and as they move south back along the Mediterranean, they end up maybe a tragic hunting accident, and half of their community is gone. Males and females are hunting during this time, and it needs to be understood. But maybe a tragic hunting accident, and half their community is lost. Maybe there is a disease within their community that only affects the males of the population, right? For some reason, there is a replacement of the Y DNA as they're moving back up into the northern regions of their territory. Again, we see that the Gravatians are 3 genetically distinct groups with the same culture that are in 3 different locations across Europe. Some people place the Gravatian culture between the mid 30,000, so like 36 to 24,000 years ago, and some people place the Gravatian people between 40 and 30,000 years ago. It is important to understand that what we're doing is we are, from hindsight, naming a culture that never thought of themselves as a culture, probably didn't think of themselves as culturally distinct from the culture before them, probably didn't think of themselves as different from the culture before them. We distinguish them as different from the culture before them and different from the culture after them only based on the material evidence of their goods that they leave behind, their belongings. How we distinguish cultures as we look back is based on their belongings, not based on their genetic continuity. So the genetic continuation of a group might be there, and the cultural change might happen. And so we might call the same genetic group who were the Gravatians the Bell Beakers later on. This is because of the fact that when we look at cultural shift in an archaeological standpoint, what we are doing is we are naming groups based on the cultural leavings. We're not naming them based on genetics, right? We're not naming them based on the idea that they're a genetically different group. We're naming the culture based on its cultural leavings. We literally named the Bell Beakers because their beakers are shaped like bells. Their drinking cups or beakers are shaped like bells. And this is literally why we named them the Bell Beakers. It has nothing to do with their genetics. It's also important to understand that a lot of times genetics stay pretty stable in an area, and the culture will shift in an area. So I had to have a discussion with somebody a while ago about they believed that the Celtic people were not the original inhabitants of the island of Britain. And the reason that they believe that is because they believe that hunter-gatherers had come in, or hunter-gatherers had been the original inhabitants, and then European farmers had come in and replaced the hunter-gatherer DNA, right? Yet when we look at this, what we see is that the DNA does not get replaced, the culture gets replaced, right? And it's so we can classify. So we can decide that this is an advanced state of culture. And it is very much that we can classify them and classify what stage of development they're on, right? Because we're like that. We like to classify what stage of development they're on. We like to classify where we think they belong because we like to classify and we like to state, oh, this development stage is better than this development stage is better than this development stage.
Right. And that's why I jumped up. Thank you for having me on again. The thing of the matter is that I see a lot of people on TikTok saying, okay, so um, your culture determines whether or not you're indigenous. And the fact of the matter is, if you're first people, you're first people. That's what indigenous means. There is indigenous culture, but indigenous culture is a living thing.
Yeah.
And everybody's going to develop, like, there are certain things that my people no longer have as their cultural practices, and we're still valid. We need not invalidate people because they're disconnected from their culture or they have changed their culture. Colonization did happen. It did affect us. So just because we find this in science, that was for them to be able to distinguish time periods.
Yes. Yes, very much. And it was just a question of indigeneity.
Just like my mother did not have computers growing up,
which does not mean you're genetically different. Yep.
Right, and it doesn't mean we're not the same people either.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a complex thing, and using that to split the hairs is going to be. Whew.
Well, and I do, because there are certain reasons that we should split some of these hairs. Like, so I do want to make sure that it's understood that if you're Germanic in descent, if your people come from any of the Germanic cultures, which is pretty much all of the northern western half of Eurasia, right? If your people come from a Germanic culture, you are not currently German indigenous, right? Your ancestors had an indigenous culture, right? And the only reason that I state this is because there are many people who will use things like I'm Nordic indigenous to discount the actual indigenous groups in that space, like the Sami, right? So I do want to clarify that indigenous does, as a society, as a culture, does mean belonging to a group that has carried on continuity of thought process of communal with the land, right? A culture that is indigenous. You can have indigenous ancestors.
We need to establish one more thing, though.
Yes, absolutely.
If we're going to say that, we need to establish one more thing. First people are first people, period.
Yes.
Here, and given the fact that we have very recently undergone colonization, some of these cultures have changed, including some of the things that have happened from colonization. And so if we find somebody who is indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, given what we are still going through, it's ongoing. Just because somebody is disconnected from their culture does not negate their indigeneity here. We're talking about a few hundred years, not thousands.
Well, and I'm not saying, so what I'm saying with that one, because this isn't what you were stating right there, is an extremely important point, right? What I'm stating with that is, if there's not, like, specifically if you're looking at Germanic peoples, right? And I'm using European because this is an issue that affects European indigenous people more than it affects Turtle Island indigenous people. There is a lot more of a clear line of indigenous and not indigenous here than I think can be when we look at Americans and their view of indigeneity and their view of Europe indigeneity, right? And because of European indigenous cultures that are still trying to be recognized, still trying to, receive land back, it's important to acknowledge that if you're Germanic, your ancestors are indigenous. You yourself are not part of the Germanic indigenous group because there is not a current Germanic indigenous community, right? When we are looking at places like Turtle Island, where we are looking at culture and colonization that is recent, culture that has been recently forced removed, right? when we're looking at that, there is a huge level of difference. And those cultures, even if, okay, so there's 500 federally recognized nations. Even if your culture was not a member of a federally recognized nation, your culture is still recognized as being, I mean, not federally often, but still recognized as being culture.
Because it's real simple, because here we're still undergoing a genocide. They're still actively trying to erase us and our culture. So when she's talking about other places and other circumstances, those people have had more than double, more than triple the time separated from their people and changed genetically, physically. We're talking completely different. So if you run across somebody whose grandma was kidnapped from their people and they were adopted out by white people, they're completely disconnected. And even with admixture and they're still indigenous here, because this is very, very recent, just a few hundred years. So I see people utilizing this. They say, if you're not connected to your culture, if you haven't had that continuity, you're no longer indigenous. They don't understand the concept of a couple hundred years versus thousands, and how we're still undergoing that genocide. So when we bring validity to that and we say somebody has to be attached to a culture here, we're saying when the colonizer touches you, it's like a butterfly. You are no longer, they got you, they win. And we don't do that.
Well, and I think too, it's important to recognize that we're not talking about cultures that have survived, right? When I'm talking about Germanic cultures, I'm not talking about a culture that currently is an indigenous culture. And that's for me the point of difference, right?
Yeah.
Whereas indigenous culture here is still here.
Yeah, and even if somebody has been detribalized, it's still within the culture. There are echoes of indigenous culture here throughout the lands.
Yes, and that's what I meant by when I was saying, even if you're not a member of one of the 5 federally recognized nations, your nation, the idea of indigeneity has still continued as a cultural idea within this space, right? Whereas within Germanic space, the idea of indigeneity as a culture, those cultures are no longer indigenous. And that's the difference there, and that is important between here and Europe, right? Here we still have space where, and in Europe, there are still spaces where indigenous culture has continued and is recognized as indigenous continuing culture, right? You don't have to be connected to the Sami to be reconnecting to the Sami, right? You have to, you can't reconnect. You can reconnect to your indigenous ancestor, but you can't of Germanic descent, right? If you're Germanic descent, you can reconnect to your Germanic indigenous ancestors and heritage, but you can't reconnect to a current ongoing indigenous culture within it, right? None of this should ever negate anybody's ability to reconnect to an indigenous culture that is there, right? We should all be doing our best to reconnect to some level.
Indigenous people, no matter how small their blood quantum, either.
Very much so.
Yeah, we're talking the difference between, and I think that's why I've had some people ask me, okay, so 100 years changes people. I think that someone misheard you or someone talking about 100 years. You were talking about 100 generations.
Yeah, that's very true. Years. Well, and there's other people out there that will say that 100 years changes people. So they may have actually heard somebody state that without them having the actual knowledge, right? And I would state that 100 years does change somebody, but 100 years doesn't give a species adaptation. 100 years is going to, epigenetics alone gives you a significant change between you and your 6th great grandmother. The trauma that she went through being imprinted on your bones was not imprinted on her bones until after she went through it, right? So yes, there's significant changes in the epigenetic thought process between you and your 6th great grandmother. That does not mean that your indigeneity has changed. It does not mean that your ability to connect to that ancestry has changed. And it does not mean that your indigenous needs have changed. Like those, we often talk about the fact that knowing who your ancestors are, you know what to eat better, you know what to do better, for your own physiologies, body needs, right? It doesn't change those. It would give you significant epigenetic changes, but not significant as into the fact that we're talking about an entire community. When we're talking about adaptation, we're not talking about a singular line of a human being. We're talking about the adaptation of a community. When we're talking about indigenous community, we're talking about community, not singular people, right? There's a huge difference. And I think that a lot of people are having a hard time with that. There's a huge difference within the word community and individual. There should not be individual in the thought process that we think of individual today. There is still a very huge difference. Well, probably because of the fact that we have that difference. There is still a very huge difference on a genetic scale between individual and community.
And there are still going to be, I mean, if we think about culture is, I believe that it is a system of practices developed by a specific community as answer to needs.
Absolutely.
Right? And with that being said, and this is why the genetic portion of it is so important, and location.
Yeah.
Right? Physical location, whether or not they're practicing the culture or not, because things like an iron deficiency that runs in my family, right? My tribe historically, when we would catch an animal, we would give the liver to pregnant women or girls, young women or children, right? So even if I did not know, let's say I was kidnapped at birth and then raised by Wahite people, right? I would still be dealing with that.
Yes.
And I would still need the answer to that need. So our ancestors spent tens of thousands of years perfecting a culture that works for our bodies and our genetics in a specific environment. And so nothing can erase that. It's certainly not a couple hundred years.
Oh, certainly not a couple hundred years. I think that's really a very important thing to state and understand, is that it's certainly not a couple hundred years that you can. Yes, epigenetics changes you, right? But it is not like that's the imprinted trauma on your bones. It doesn't mean that your needs have changed. It doesn't mean that the way that your body has adapted to a specific space or a specific situation has changed. It means that, you might react to different trauma differently because your epigenetics gave you that trauma. And so, you've had to, you experience it. That's what epigenetics means, right? Is that somebody else's trauma is imprinted in your bones. And so you might trigger off of it, right? It does not mean that your entirety of being has changed, right?
How long did it take for Europeans to go from their physical appearance when they first got there to the lighter skin and lighter eyes? Do you have a timeline on about how long that took?
40,000 years. So,
see what I'm saying, folks?
And that's to start, because so we know that Europeans start moving into Europe at 40,000 years or at 50,000 years ago. And we know that 10,000 years ago, the Cheddarmen find in England, and all of our finds at 10,000 years ago show dark skin and dark hair. The hair is straightened in some of them by then, but dark skin and dark hair. So that means that 40,000 years did not change the genetics for dark skin. So to become part of, the majority of the population having light skin doesn't really start until like 3,000 years ago. Like, we might get the majority of the population getting lighter skin. And again, I need to make sure that we talk about a scale, because when we look at Otzi is 5,000 years ago, and Otzi is darker of skin than those in that current location would be today. Otzi is what we would term as being kind of Middle Eastern brown, right? So, and that's at 5,000 years ago in the Swiss Alps, right? So we're looking 5,000 years ago and seeing somebody who is still darker of skin than his descendants would be today. And we don't really see the light that we see today until after that. So it takes thousands and thousands of years for us to adapt from having dark skin to having light skin. within Europe itself. And that's thousands and thousands of years of living steadily in that space, right? It takes thousands and thousands of years of living steadily in that space. It is transgeneral. When we talk about epigenetics, Levity, we're talking about transgenerational trauma. So epigenetics is the imprint of transgenerational trauma in our bones, and it absolutely happens like that. And we absolutely here are dealing on, 500 years of transgenerational or epigenetic trauma, right? So I don't know why the hair straightening. It could possibly be that hair lying against the scalp keeps it warm a little bit more, but we do see that straighter hair also develops in some environments that are warmer, right? So I'm not exactly sure why the hair straightening. I do know the why the hair being tightly coiled, but I do not know the why it's straightened out yet. I haven't seen a study on that yet. There might be studies out there, but I have not seen one on it yet. Yeah, look into epigenetics, epigenetic trauma, Koshi. You jumped down a tier. I hope I wasn't talking over you too much. I apologize if I was. That was not my intent. You have some very good points, and I think that they're very needed. Well, and it's not just vitamin D and melanin, right? So yes, we get more vitamin D when our skin is lighter. But there's also UV protection that's necessary, right? And we also get vitamin D from other areas of the environment. There are plenty of plants that we can get vitamin D in. So it's not, and I'm not saying that it's not only, or that it's not that at all. I'm just saying it's not only that, just because for a lot of people, they only equate it with that. And it is not only that, just that we're aware. And we do see that the other effects, like if it was such a need, then thank you, Adira. If it is such a need, right, then why did it take 40,000 years? Why wasn't it the first adaptation? Why was lighter eyes the first adaptation if the vitamin D need I'm not saying it's not needed, but was such a huge need, then why was it, something that took much longer than the need for the eye color change, right? So we do see again that it takes quite some time for those in Europe to become lighter of skin. That light skin within Europe is, again, a very recent thing. And again, like I said, I'm going to say this 100 times during this live. Light skin is not a genetic advantage except for in spaces with low sun content, which means that it is not a genetic advantage for our species, which means that it is not a genetic advantage. The genetic advantage is the ability to change, the ability to be chameleons and to change our skin tone, right? That is the genetic advantage. In fact, darker skin has more genetic advantage in more areas than light skin. So to equate light skinned with being more advanced, which is a very racist take that has been utilized throughout history, is an extremely problematic and extremely false thought process. There is no species advantage to having light skin. In fact, there is a lot of species problem with having light skin. Having light skin means that we're more prone to skin cancer. Having light skin means that we are more prone to coldness or to hot weather. And having light skin means that we can overdose from vitamin D depending on the area that we're in. Having dark skin is less prone to skin cancer. Having dark skin may not give you as much vitamin D in an area, but you can get vitamin D from other things. You can't prevent the overdose of vitamin D by eating the right plants, but you can prevent the underdose of vitamin D by eating the right plants, right? So if one or the other is a genetic advantage, the genetic advantage is actually dark skin. So don't let the racists tell you that it is, and it's evolution and we evolved to be better and therefore white, because that is not on any level or any means how that happens or how that works. So as we're moving through Europe during this time, this is a time period where we are becoming indigenous to space. So let's talk a little bit. We touched a little bit on what indigenous means, but let's talk in the now, right? What indigenous means now. Let's talk a little bit about what indigenous is in this time period, right? So indigenous means either being created in a space, like the word indigenous itself, not applied just to people. Indigenous means either being created in a space or being created for a space, right? So, again, we're talking about things like plants and animals, right? Um, so, as we see people moving into space, we see now, first of all, this thought process means that the people who are indigenous to Europe would be the Neanderthals, right? If we are going for the word indigenous as plants or animals, right? Because the Neanderthals speciated in Europe, whereas Homo sapiens does not speciate in Europe. Another part of indigenous, when we're looking at that term as applied to human beings, is about moving into a space, being the first people who arrive in a space, though that is not the only qualifier for indigeneity, because there are spaces where the indigenous group arrived at the same time as a different group. Um, but being the first people to arrive in a space and becoming a part of that space. Okay. Now, what do I mean about becoming a part of that space? Well, we talk about indigenous languages. We're looking at languages that indigenous languages are languages that understand all of the elements of the world around it and can name all the elements of the world around it in a way that you understand just by the name what I'm talking about. I usually use the fact that I grew up in the Pacific Northwest here. And in the Pacific Northwest, we speak English because that's unfortunately the tongue of the colonizer. Yet in the Pacific Northwest, we also have about 20 different names for rain. And I can tell you by what I say for the word rain, just what is going on outside your door. Okay. I can tell you it's sleeting outside, and you'll understand that the rain's coming down really heavy. You probably need to wear a hat and take a jacket. You don't take an umbrella because we don't use those here unless we're protesting. Um, and you probably need to take a hat to cover your glasses. If you wear glasses, you probably need to wear a coat. I said it was sleeting out. Now, if I tell you it's just drizzling out, you're probably not going to take anything because you know that the drizzle is going to not really bother you. If I tell you it's misty out, you know that the mist is not going to bother you. If I tell you it's pouring, you know that it's going to bother you, right? You might want to leave a little early so you can avoid all the other idiots on the road, right? Things like that. So when we look at indigenous language describes space on a level that English does not. Now, why? Because English is a bastardized language made up of about 10 different languages, and it applies words from other areas to a new area in its colonization, because it is one of the languages of colonization. What do I mean by this? The word tribe means a community based on genetic lineage. It is a Latin word that was initially applied to the tribes of Latins that were on the Roman Peninsula or the Italian Peninsula. The tribes of Latins that were on the Italian Peninsula or the tribes of Italy are nations that are built on family lineage. So you're belonging to a nation, your place in a nation is about your family lineage. The word tribe applies to a nation or a community that is based on genetic lineage. Now, as you see the Romans moving across Europe, you see that the Romans apply the word tribe to many communities across Europe that are not necessarily tribal communities. They might actually be bands. Bands is a community that's not based on genetic lineage. Your citizenship is not based on your genetic lineage. Think of the United States. The United States is a community that is based not on genetic lineage. Your citizenship here is not based on your genetics here. Whereas Israel or Judaic peoples is a community that is based on your genetic lineage. You must be born into the Judaic community to be a citizen of the Judaic community. This is a tribe. Now, because Romans did not understand the difference as they're moving across to the globe, and they're moving across Europe, I guess the Romans are more Europe than anything else. As they're moving across Europe, they start to apply the word tribe to everyone, right? And so as they're, colonizing this entire space, and as some of their language is therefore being picked up by the people that they colonize, because that's what happens, right? If somebody is colonizing you, you tend to use their language so that you can maybe get a little bit not dead. And so we see that people start picking up the word tribe, but they don't pick it up as a community based on genetic lineage. They pick it up based as a community that lives in a specific way, right? So now, today, we look at tribe as things like the word tribal, meaning a group that is based on what we think of as being, we like to use the word primitive. I hate that word. It is not a word that works. But communities that Western thought process views in a specific way, so we call them tribal. This has nothing to do with how those communities' citizenship is garnered. It has nothing to do with how those communities have citizenship, right? So there are many people within the United States who wish that our citizenship was only based on genetics, right? We call them the right wing around here. So there are many people in the United States that wish that our community was tribe, right? Yet if you told them that, that's not how they would view it, right? That's not true, homunculus. Absolutely, Devlin. So that's not true. Let me talk on that just a little bit. Let me talk about what the difference is between migration, immigration, and colonization. These are three vocabulary terms that are really important. And just like I was just talking about the fact that the word tribe isn't what we think, that's not true. Again, homunculus, can you listen? Just a second. Close your mouth. Learn to listen. It's okay. So I'm answering your question, right? You came in to where a teacher is talking. You're getting your question answered. That's an advantage for you, right? So the difference between immigration, migration, and colonization as vocabulary terms, as actual terms. Immigration is moving into a space that migration is moving into a space that nobody is in. And as you move into the space that nobody is in, you are migrating to that space. Migration can also be a yearly pattern of movement, right? Immigration is moving into a space where there are already people there, and you become a part of the culture that is there. You might immigrate from Iran and move to the United States, and you become a part of the United States culture, and you become a citizen of the United States. This is immigration. Colonization is moving into a space that is already populated by other people and replacing their government and their culture with your own government and culture. So immigration, migration, and colonization are three different terms. They're three different words. All of the world had people migrate to it. Many spaces in the world had people immigrate to them. Okay. So if I am migrating, I'm moving into a land that doesn't have people there. Now I form my community, I form my culture. The next group of people that come in is immigrating, and they're coming in and they're becoming a part of my culture. Later on, somebody decides to colonize, and they come in, almost always with violence, and they try and kill off the culture and the government that is already in place and replace that culture in that government with their own, and that is colonization. So not every corner of the globe has been colonized. Not every corner of the globe has been colonized. Every portion of the globe has had immigration or migration to it. Humans cover pretty much every portion of the globe. That is migration. That is immigration. That is not colonization, because that is not replacing a government or a culture that is already there with your own. There's a difference. Vocabulary, the meanings of words matter. When we are talking about the differences in language, which is what we were talking about when we were talking about the word tribe, and we were talking about the way colonization has changed the word tribe from its original meaning into something else, right? Now, of course, we were talking about the colonizers changing that word themselves, right? Today, we look at the word tribe as not meaning what it meant originally, which is a community based on genetic lineage. Yes, I would say that anybody who is conquering another space is a colonizer. Why do I say that anybody is conquering another space is a colonizer? Because if you are conquering another space, you're replacing the culture and the government of that space with your own culture and government. Even if you leave a client king in space, you are still replacing the governmental structure with your own governmental structure, and that's colonization. So anybody who is a conquering people is absolutely colonizing another space. They're colonizing whoever they're conquering. There is not a distinction. For me, though, I would state that we have groups, communities that I'm going to use one that you probably know of. It might even be what you're looking at. Yes, this is a Gervasian. This is one of the first cultures that is in Europe. And this is probably what you're thinking of here. The Aztec and the Maya. The Aztec and the Maya historically both inhabit the same space, right? Historically are both a part of the same space. When the Aztec returned to the space that they were historically a part of, right? When they return to that space, they conquer the Mayan and they colonize the Mayan people, right? This to me is more of a fight between cousins over the land grandpa gave them than having people come to a land that was never theirs and replacing the government there. Absolutely, if you're talking about killing off a bunch of people and conquering them, we're still talking about colonization, right? Again, though, for me, when you're fighting over land that both of your ancestors have lived in, we're talking about groups that started out as the same community, right? We're talking about two distinct communities that started as the same community and split off into two separate communities. So, it's not that it's still colonization because you're still conquering another people and replacing their government with yours. It is still also your ancestral lands, right? So there's not a distinction within it. It is still colonization. To me, I have a better understanding of the why. And to me, I can give greater grace to somebody that is returning to somewhere that they might have originally occupied, right? When we're looking at something like that. Right. Fuck, the words are not going to work right in my head, so I'm not going to state the different nations that were involved within the Rwandan genocide. Yet the different nations that were involved within the Rwandan genocide are still two different nations of people that have been in that space for an extended period of time, right? I don't know who Karl Tobe is off the top of my head. There's still two groups of people who are the ancestral occupiers of that space. Yeah, and now I can say, because you've actually typed it out, like I have to view it. Sometimes the Tutsis and the Hutus, I wanted to say something differently for a Hutu, and I was like, I know that that's not right, and unless I look it up, I'm not going to be able to say it right. Thank you for putting it in chat. Those two nations are still both the occupying nation of that space, like they both have occupied that space, right? And when they have occupied that space, that fight as absolutely an outer force destabilizing them. It is still an act of colonization to force somebody to give up their government and their culture to recognize your government and culture, right? So, while they're still both historically occupying that space, it's still both of their space. It is still colonization for the Swedish and Norwegian governments to impose their government and their culture on the Sami. And the Sami and the Scandinavian people arrive in the region at the same time. So they are historically both people that have been in that region for an extended period of time. And yet one is considered native and one is considered indigenous because the native people impose their government on the indigenous people. Very much a colonization thought process, right? So, yes, absolutely. There is not a distinction. I think that there should be, I guess is the best way to state it. There is not a distinction. I think that there should be. It does not mean that I think that anything should excuse the brutality that happens in some of those spaces. Like the brutality that was committed, by the Aztec is pretty heavy. The brutality that was committed in Rwanda is pretty heavy. The brutality that was committed against the Sami is pretty heavy. And we're looking at two groups that are ancestrally a part of that community or a part of that space. It does not mean that anybody had the right to commit that brutality against them because they were also ancestrally a part of that space. It is, and it's always tricky to first of all, like me and Atir were talking earlier. I don't want to speak for anybody else. That's not my space, right? I know my lane and I try and stay in my lane, right? And so there's also that becomes very tricky. I don't want to be speaking for any of these groups, right? And I don't want it to come across as me stating like fuck the Aztec, like that's not what I'm saying, or fuck the Swiss, that's not what I'm, or Swedish, that's not what I'm saying. I just am trying to be as truthful and honest about the situation as I possibly can, because I believe that that's the only way to bring honor to it, is to be as truthful and honest about the situation as I possibly can, and try and do as much honor to all involved, right? Yeah, I was very much trying to try to respect the line. So when we're looking at colonization versus migration versus immigration, it is important to understand that not all spaces were colonized. Not all humans are colonizers. And I want to state that this is something that, like, when I first started looking at, of course, I've been involved in archaeology and anthropology for decades before I went to school for it. But when I was first starting in school, one of the classes that I was in made me go, shit, that's just who we are as a species. Are we all just colonizer shitheads? Like, is it all of us? Are we just all colonized? Is that just how we all fucking behave? And so I had to go in and actually look at the definition of the words and talk to a couple of professors and stuff like that about it, because for me it was very much a shit, is that who we are as a species? That's kind of fucked up. I do have degrees. I have degrees in medicine and degrees in anthropology. And so, like, I had to take a look and to reassess that thought process. But it is very important that we look at the fact that colonization, migration, and immigration are three different words. And there are three different ways that this planet was settled by humans. And it is important that, while most areas currently have been colonized, that we are not all colonizers, that there are still spaces on this planet that have not been colonized, usually spaces that other groups don't consider inhabitable because they're idiotic and can't understand the concept of being able to inhabit spaces that don't have a lot. History degrees are awesome. Israel actually colonized. Israel did not immigrate. Israel is actually a colonizing nation. The nation of Israel is actually a colonizing. They actually document it in their own historical works. So Israel is not an immigration nation. Israel is actually a colonizing nation, and Israel actually colonized the Canaanites, who are the ancestors of the Lebanese and the Palestinians. The Lebanese, who they are trying to bomb, and the Palestinians, who they're trying to eradicate. So, Israel has been colonizing that space for 3,000 years. Again, when we're looking at European history, because that did come out of the European history concept, because that's what we're supposed to be talking about today, it's important to recognize that within a European space, that not all European space was initially colonized. European space, actually, colonization probably starts prior to 3,000 years ago. I would state that colonization, our documentation of colonization isn't really prior to that. Actually, no, I take that back. The state of Egypt, Kemet, actually colonized a few places. Um, the early the early writings of like Mesopotamia and stuff like that, there's actually evidence of them colonizing other spaces, taking over other spaces, right? No, you're fine. You didn't derail. You're fine. And that's true. A few hundred years does not make people foreign to their own land, right? And that's a really great thing when we're looking at Israel and Palestine. Actually, um, Palestinians are the descendants of the Canaanites. Just because the Canaanite culture is not the current culture there, does not mean that they do not show, that long-term occupation of that land. They do not show that long-term struggle with that space, right? So, uh, you know the Palestinians have gone through a religion change. The Palestinians have gone through a language change. Both the language and the religious change started by their colonizers, because the Israelites started both the language and the religion change. The Semitic language is the original languages of all the area. The Semitic language groups are the original languages of both groups. So we are talking a Semitic people. Um, so absolutely, when we're looking, we see a lot of that, right? We see that we're looking at a group who has been undergoing colonization for literally 3,000 years. The earliest documented colonization of them is literally 3,000 years ago. When we're looking at the Torah, right? It talks about the colonization of the Canaanites. It talks about the colonization of that space. And so, we are looking at a people who have been colonized by the Judaic people, and then colonized by the Romans, and then colonized by the Arabic groups, the Ottomans, and then are being colonized by Israel again, right? So we are looking at a people who have undergone colonization for several thousand years. There are names in Palestine that are Canaanite names, like family names in Palestine that are Canaanite family names. So you can still see some remnants of the culture of the Canaanites within them, and yet we are not looking at a whole lot of remnants of the Canaanite culture within the group, because of the extensive colonization by many different groups of people, right? So change this, and then change that, and then change this, and then change that, right? And because of that, we're absolutely seeing that the continuity of culture, and the continuity of language, and the continuity of those different things that we look at when we're looking at indigeneity aren't necessarily all there. Or those that are there in such a small, minute amount that some people may state that doesn't matter, right? And yet we can see a continuity of the relationship with the land, a continuity of the relationship with space, and a continuity of the relationship with with ancestry, right? Within the community as a whole. And that, again, we have to distinguish that, you can be an indigenous person who is not connected to your community. There needs to be a community there for it to be an indigenous community, right? And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be the specific nation that you belong to. It has to be, the concept, the idea, the relationship, the understanding that is continuity within community. So when we're looking at, this area, we're actually seeing the start of how colonization happens throughout the globe within that area. Now, obviously, the Gravatian period behind me is well before the concept of colonization, well before the concept of my community is better than your community, right? Let me go over these terms again really quick, Alex. So colonization, immigration, and migration are three different terms for movement. Migration is moving into an area that doesn't have people there. It's also migrating on a seasonal pattern for food sustenance. Immigration is moving into an area that already has people, has a culture, has a government, and you become a part of the culture and the government there. Colonization is moving into an area that already has a people, a culture, a government, and supplanting or replacing those people, culture, and government with your own, right? Land back on a global scale. And absolutely, Indigenous languages should be main languages taught in schools. Land back on a global scale, and Indigenous language should be taught. And what I mean by land back on a global scale is that the Athabascan speaking nations should be those intending and governance of the Athabascan speaking lands. The Comanche should have their own space back, and the Apache should have their own space back. And if they want to continue arguing over spaces that were both of their spaces, they should absolutely have that right, Alex. And you thinking that your bad faith argument, thank you for stating that one, that your bad faith argument has any weight in whether or not people deserve their control over themselves, their control over their children, their control over their community, their control over their space, has any fucking weight. It's because you're mighty whitey and you can take it elsewhere, or you can close your mouth and learn to listen, because I don't deal with your racism in my chat. Because that's exactly what that is. That's your shit. Take it elsewhere. Learn to be a better human being. Learn to be a better community member. Learn to do better for the people around you. Take it elsewhere. So when we're looking at the movement across the globe, and we're looking at people starting to, it was mentioned earlier, why are we reaching this point of Western-based agriculture, monocrop agriculture? There's thought process. There's a few different thought processes on why we moved to monocrop agriculture. I'm not sure what I think about all of them. The main one seems to be that monocrop agriculture comes about because of the fact that there is a change in environment. And it is thought that monocrop agriculture, is going to be something that is going to help with that. Europeans don't turn white until roughly 3,000 years ago. So as we're looking at monocrop agriculture moving across the land, we're looking at it moving across the land at a time when there is environmental changes. Again, and I've stated this one in here before, monocrop agriculture works along the Nile, where it started, because the Nile is constantly replenishing the nutrients in the ground along the Nile when it floods. And so when you see monocrop agriculture working along the Nile, other people decide that they're going to, that's not why they turned white, but okay. Other people decide that they're going to utilize this, and they start utilizing this out in the Fertile Crescent, out in the Arabian Peninsula, and out in, mainly in the Arabian Peninsula, and the Levant area. That's the other one I was thinking of. So as we're utilizing these, this new style, first of all, the first thing that it does is start to starve us. Monocrop agriculture doesn't actually provide more food. It actually provides less food. Hunting and gathering provides more calories for less effort. Period. Every day of the week. So many studies have been done on this. There are studies on my site about this. Hunting and gathering, or gathering, which is one of those other knowledges that it's no longer, well, we were hunting more than we were gathering. We're probably gathering more than we're hunting. Actually, I knew about that one from before, because we've talked about that in school. I talked about that in Egyptology in school. But when we're looking at food sustenance, monocrop agriculture actually provides less nutrient per labor hour than hunting and gathering does. Hunting and gathering provides more nutrient per labor hour than monocrop agriculture. And yet we are looking at this change in sustenance. Basically, this is a new idea. And when it starts to fail, people get stubborn. And instead of understanding that it's failing, they just double down, because some of us be like that, right? So as they see it starting to fail and they double down, they kind of spread it everywhere, right? And as they're spreading it everywhere across the globe, the spread of everywhere, oh shit. We're going to talk about this again more. I just realized the time and I have to get off of here because I have to go get my son shortly. I'm going to go ahead and go over a couple things that I try and touch on in the end of the live. I'm going to try and do it as quickly as possible because I'll take 20 minutes and I don't need to. We talked earlier about how we're biologically nurturing. We talked earlier about how we're biologically communal. We are a species that must have nurture and must have community to be healthy. Currently, many of us are dealing with a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of feelings of there's something wrong. And a lot of times we internalize that something wrong is ourselves. You too, Star. This is a healthy response to an unhealthy society. We are living in an unhealthy society. And your feelings of being disconnected, your feelings of, there's a problem, your feelings of depression, your feelings of anxiety, those are healthy responses to a society that's gaslighting you that nurturing and communal is bad, right? And so I need you to understand that these are healthy responses. This is a healthy response. Because we are nurturing and communal as a species, it is requirement for us to have nurturing and communal for us to be healthy, which means that we must have love to be healthy. We must have, and I don't mean sex, I mean love. We must have community that tends to us and nurtures us to be healthy. We don't have that a lot anymore. And because we don't have that a lot anymore, we're feeling that disconnect and we're feeling that pain. So I want to remind you today that every single human being who breathes has the right to life. And the right to life includes nurture and community because those are needs for you to sustain life. So take care of yourself today and give yourself love and empathy. Give yourself love and empathy. Give yourself some grace. Give the world some grace. It deserves it and you deserve it. You deserve it just for breathing. You are necessary. You are needed in our society and needed in our culture. And it should be understood, though it is not often understood, that you can't fix a problem you can't identify. So if you are identifying that there is a problem, you are a part of the solution. And so I ask you today to give yourself grace, to give yourself love. You deserve it. You are worthy of it. It is necessary to you. Okay? Give yourself love and give yourself grace. And if you feel that there's a problem, it's because you're recognizing it and you are now a part of the solution, which means you're more worthy. You're solving problems for the community as a whole. Much love, everybody. I will be back soon, probably tonight, maybe tomorrow. We'll see whether or not I want to go play Sims. Much love, everybody. Have a great day to all of you. Watch me take forever to figure out how to turn off a live because I am so technologically disadvantaged. See you later, YouTube.